behind the Marine House, just barely in view. Hanley had been Army a long time ago. A Green Beret officer, he'd then moved to the agency, and he never looked back. Now he was 61, portly, and pre-diabetic. His health wasn't the best, but the .45 he carried and the bodyguard who traveled with him at least protected him from most external threats. He looked away from the window and back to his computer, telling himself he'd put in another hour of work before heading to a restaurant for dinner. His bodyguard would join him. It was his job, after all, so at least he'd have some company. As deputy chief of station, Hanley kept a pretty full plate, but much of the work he'd been involved with in the past few months had nothing to do with Colombia, nothing to do with his duties here at the embassy. His office was here, in South America, but much of his late work, and virtually all his attention, had been focused on the area of the world 8,000 miles away, Central Europe. His friend and former employee, Court Gentry, had gone off in search of Hanley's other former employee, Zoya Zakharova. She'd been kidnapped by the Chinese and delivered to the Russians, where there was a kill order out on her. Hanley had spent months trying to get intel on Zoya's whereabouts, to find a suitable vector into Russia for Court, and to rally people in the CIA to help in the endeavor. For weeks, the two men reached out to contacts they'd both developed over the years, Hanley as an operations officer, then the head of the Special Activities Division, and then the head of all CIA ops, and Court, who had been a CIA singleton operator inside Russia many years ago. But their work had been fruitless. Anyone they knew with any pull or power inside Russia, it seemed, had been rolled up by government goons, sent to Ukraine to die in the meat assaults, or thrown into penal colonies for dissent, or else they simply refused to communicate with American intelligence. Russia had become an oppressive police state, as dark and dangerous as it had been during the darkest and most dangerous days of the Cold War. Intelligence sources reported that a former female Russian foreign intelligence officer had been executed in the Fortova prison. Zoya's name had not been mentioned, but she'd neither been seen nor heard from again, so it certainly seemed to Hanley and to the CIA at large that she was gone. Court had dismissed the intel out of hand, refused to believe it in its accuracy, and when Hanley and Lacey continued with the assertion, Court had broken off contact with them both, and he'd gone rogue. His plan, Hanley surmised, had been to get into the country, to kidnap someone who might know where Zoya was, and then to extract the information from this person. After that, Hanley did not know what Court's plan was, or even if Court had any plan at all. Hanley knew Court had gone to the Balkans, apparently to try to stow away on a ship crossing the Black Sea into Russia. A fool's errand. If Zoya was somehow still alive, Russia was the largest country on Earth by landmass, and Court had no clue as to where she could be. It would be hard enough to make it over the border and into Russia. But if Court managed to accomplish this, it would be harder still, because Russia was a 6.6 million square mile police state. Hanley had spent the last month watching the news and reading the intel reports from the Balkans. He saw evidence of Court's work, and he was beginning to think evidence of his madness. 7 weeks ago, a pair of skinheads were beaten almost to death in Belgrade. Word was they'd been tailing a man who'd left a bar after telling a patron he was looking for a well-known pro-Russian politician. The skinheads had been brutalized horribly in the attack, but the Serbian politician had immediately left the country in fear for his safety. 2 weeks later, there had been a massacre in Varna, Bulgaria. A mafia underboss slaughtered, his bodyguard killed, others injured. Reports came out that a single perpetrator had been responsible for all the carnage. Since then, Matt had heard nothing, and he feared that his old asset's recklessness would inevitably lead to his death. He put the odds at 50-50 that Court was still alive, because the silence from the Balkans over the past weeks had been deafening. As he got ready to wrap up his work tonight, his phone buzzed, and it was his Signal app, an untraceable communication service he used when he didn't even want CIA commo involved in his dealings. He picked it up, his curiosity piqued. Hanley. Hello, sir. It's Daniel Jung calling. The deputy COS in Bogota bolted upright in his chair now. Jung was the COS in Sofia, Bulgaria, and Hanley had asked him to get in touch if he heard wind of anything in his region that sounded like what had happened in Varna. Hanley had been vague, and most definitely did not say that he knew the Gray Man was there. and Hanley was attempting to help him from the U.S. Embassy in Bogota. Hey, Daniel. Shit. What time is it there? Just past 3 a.m. He cleared his throat. I'll give you the bottom line up front. That thing you told me to be on the lookout for? Well, it happened. Where? Not here in Bulgaria, but up in Romania. We're getting traffic from the station in Bucharest. Details still to come, I'm sure. But here's what we know. About midnight, 5 men were shot dead in a bar in Ferentari. It's the seediest neighborhood in the city. Familiar with it. People are killed there all the time, Dan. All 5 of the dead were soldiers for the Ndrangheta. Oh, yeah, a massacre. Court, Hanley thought, but did not say. Holy shit, was his actual response. And, Jung said, you ready for this? Matt was indeed ready, because he felt certain he knew what the COS was about to say. Hit me. Witnesses at the scene are claiming... Wait for it? Matt did not have to wait for it, but he did anyway. There was only one shooter. Feigning surprise, he said, Is that a fact? Just like what happened down here, and that's only the half of it. About 30 minutes ago, a heaping pile of body parts were scooped out of a parking garage nearby. Haven't gotten a complete head count. They're going through some remains to see what they've got. But the identifiable bodies are all members of the Balan Brigazi, a local smuggling outfit, including Doreen Balan himself. He's the asshole in charge? Was until a couple hours ago. Smugglers, you say? Yeah, humans and drugs and stolen goods, most sent westward. But they are also running traffic into Russia these days. Matt knew what this meant. Court was still trying to get himself smuggled into Russia, and something, or a whole series of somethings, had once again gone terribly wrong. Anything else? Reports say no collateral at the bar. Assuming all the dead nearby were Balan's men, and the perp got away clean. Jung added, Whoever this guy is, I'd like to buy him a beer. He's single-handedly cleaning up the Balkans. Hanley knew that was most definitely not what Court Gentry was doing. No, he wasn't cleaning up anything. He was buzzsawing through everyone in his way. Damn, thanks. I appreciate it. Something else. We're picking up a lot of chatter from our contacts around the area. The GRU is working down here in the Balkans, trying to find this guy. They seem to think he's trying to sneak into Russia, and they seem to think he poses some danger if he does. Understood, Hanley said. Thanks for the intel. Sure, boss. Hanley chuckled a little. I'm not the boss anymore, or have you forgotten? I choose to forget. Watkins is a dick. You're still the boss as far as I'm concerned. Hanley smiled a little. Have a great night. He hung up, then rubbed his hands through his graying blonde hair as he thought for a moment. Court was on a suicide run, and he was so blinded by Zoe's disappearance that he didn't seem to care. Hanley racked his brain a moment more, then went back to his computer. He'd been working for months trying to help his old asset, and he'd come across some information that might be useful, but he hadn't been ready to reach out to Court about it yet. It needed more vetting, more refining. It involved the past. It was tenuous, amorphous, almost fantastical. Hanley told himself then and there that whatever the fuck Court was trying to do on his own wasn't likely to succeed either, and, as far as Hanley knew, his own plan involved fewer gangsters, smugglers, skinheads, and dark foreboding waters, so it might be worth a shot. He'd work all night, use every means at his disposal to solidify his idea into a clear course of action, and then he would make contact with Court, beg him to listen. Hanley had the sinking suspicion that this might be his last chance to try to help his old friend, because Court Gentry was living on borrowed time. 15 hours later, Court Gentry sat on his balcony on the 4th floor of the Hotel Adriana, his eyes to the east as the last light of day faded behind him. Behind him lay the coastal city of Constanța, Romania, and splayed out in front of him, to the east, the northeast, the southeast, was the Black Sea. Russia lay beyond the water, some 450 miles away. But Court wasn't focused on the distance at present. He was focused on the foreground. The port of Constanța, teeming with cargo ships and ferries, was right in front of him, and at 6:15 p.m., he brought his binoculars back to his eyes and looked once again at his target. And once again, his heart sank. The Migan was a rusty chemical oil tanker with a red hull and a white main mast. It had departed out of the port of Alea, Turkey, early this morning, and Court had been tracking it on an app on his phone throughout the day. Now it was here, in front of him, just 300 yards distant, but to Court it felt like it was a million miles away. The port of Constanza had guards, cameras, gates, dogs. The ship itself had a dozen men on deck, who wore security uniforms, and appeared to be switched on. He wondered if some surviving Brigasi member knew that this was the ship he'd asked to be put on. Maybe they dropped a dime and notified officials here at the port that there was a threat against the Migan. Court lowered his binos and rubbed his sore shoulder. Some threat. He was injured. He had no diving gear to get him to the ship via the water. He had no badge or uniform to get him onto the property. And he definitely did not have the backing of the Balan Brigasi, or any other Brigasi for that matter. He wasn't getting on board that ship through stealth. His tactical brain had told him that with assuredness. No. If he was going to make his way onto the Migan, he'd have to hit it hard. And once he did, there was no way it would then be sailing across the Black Sea to Sochi. Dropping his head into his hands now, he felt the despair choking him, just like it had hours before in Bucharest. He couldn't survive much longer with this level of wretched anguish coursing through his body. This pain, he knew, was just simply not sustainable. Still, he asked himself what choice he had, and he came up with no answer. He couldn't start over. He had to try. Court sighed. Fuck it. I'll hit it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he looked at it. It was a call on his Signal app, and that meant it would likely be Matt Hanley. Court had been avoiding Hanley for weeks now. He'd almost tossed the phone itself, but had kept it just in case there was some operational need for it. Now he saw no operational need to answer the call and talk to a man who kept insisting Zoya was dead. That said, however, Hanley had once been something of a friend. Court decided he could speak to him one last time before he went out in a blaze of glory. Yeah? Hanley seemed surprised that he'd answered. Oh, hey kid. Matt, the word on the street is you're starting a war over there in the Balkans. Court sniffed out a laugh, but it wasn't real. He'd not cracked a real smile in half a year. He said, when you think about it, what's one more war these days? Yeah, well. Hanley paused a moment, then said, you hurt? Body damage, dents and scrapes. Court knew well that it was more than his body that was damaged. Hanley said, I can get you pointed towards a clandestine medical facility. If not in Romania, over in Hungary. I know a woman there who... No thanks. Doesn't matter. Why is that? You caught me just before heading out to pick up some more damage. There was a pause. Any way I can talk you out of that? Sure. You can use your connections to find our mutual friend, who, by the way, is alive. And then you can get her out of Russia. I'm trying to help you, kid. I'm not the one who needs help. She does. Yeah. Nothing has changed there. Just the word from Moscow Station about the execution of somebody, not necessarily her. Right. The execution of a female former SVR officer at Lefordova prison. 20 days after Anthem, a female former SVR officer, was driven through the front gates of Lefordova prison. Anthem had been Zoya's code name in her short stint contracting for the CIA. Court's face twitched. He wished he had a bottle of whiskey, but this little hotel room was barren of amenities. He said, I've got to run. Hang on. You picked up the phone. You can at least listen to what I have to say. Make it quick. Look, I know you're going into Russia, one way or another. Try as I might, I can't stop you. And even though I think it's fucking nuts, I feel like I have to help you. I guess I figure I owe it to you to give you every chance of success I can give you. And tell me this. When you get into the country, what is your plan? My plan is to kidnap someone high enough in the government to get some answers. Hanley said, right. I provided you with the names and addresses of several key Kremlin and FSB officers, the locations of their dachas, the addresses of their mistresses. Court said, then you already know my plan. Once they tell me where she is, I'm going there to get her. And you're going to do this on your own? No. I'm going to link up with the Russian resistance, get them to help me. How? Now Court hesitated. Eventually, he said, I was hoping I'd have a smuggler's network to call on, either Bulgarian or Romanian. They have contacts in Russia, and if I mined them carefully, I could have made my way to the rebels in country. But you don't have a network to call on now, do you? Court took the phone away from his ear a moment, dropped his head down, then he brought it back up. No, I don't. I'll just get over the border, then I'll figure it out. Hanley said, Well, before you go off and try that bullshit plan of yours, how about you go off and try this bullshit plan of mine? You have a plan? Sort of. Court looked at the ship again, said, You are literally a demotivational speaker, aren't you? Hear me out. Court took a couple of breaths and then shrugged to himself there in the empty, dark room. Okay, I'll bite. What's your shitty idea? While you've been ignoring me, I've been working to try to find someone who can help you. Russia's a tough nut to crack these days. CIA has an odd agent here and there in country still, but no one I have access to, and no NOCs. Court himself had been an NOC, a non-official cover officer for the agency. NOCs were different than covered officers, in that they had no diplomatic status, which meant they could be arrested, imprisoned, and, in some cases in some countries, even executed for their involvement with American intelligence. We don't have a single NOC in Russia? I mean, Hanley demurred. I'm just down here in Bogota. There could be programs I'm not read into, but I've been putting feelers out at Langley, and that's the word I'm getting back. Hanley sighed a little. Ukrainian intelligence has agents inside Russia. The rebel group, the New Russia Council, based in Warsaw, has contacts there. But CIA is as hamstrung in Russia as it's been since the 1980s. So how can you help me? Court asked. Wherever you are right now, get yourself to Riga, Latvia. Why? There's a woman there, a Latvian national. She's agency affiliated, very low-level stuff now. But she used to be highly placed in a resistance courier network that operated behind the Iron Curtain. Dissidents who helped Western intelligence agencies. The network started out moving messages, then documents, then, over time, it developed into something of a rat line of contacts across the Soviet Union that moved defectors and agents around under the noses of the secret police. Hanley continued. If we needed to get someone out of the Soviet Union, they'd move along the network. If we needed to get someone in, they would help us infiltrate them. Court looked out to sea. Like an underground railroad kind of thing? Exactly that. In fact, it used to be known around Langley as Ivan's Underground Railroad. Behind the Iron Curtain, you are telling me that this network this woman belonged to dates to the Cold War? Yes, but meaning she's, what, 80? About 75, I think. Something like that. She's still alive. I do know that much. Gotta run, Matt. I'm executing a solo frontal assault on a highly protected cargo ship because that makes more sense than what you are suggesting. Wait, I get it. The Cold War was a long time ago, but this woman was rock solid, and she still knows people. She knows old people. No, she's been anti-Peskov from the jump. She maintains contacts with people inside Russia. If you can get her to put you in contact with someone who will agree to assist you while you are in country, then I believe they can direct you to members of the Freedom of Russia Legion. The Legion was the biggest and most successful organization of anti-Peskov Russian operatives in the nation. Court knew the CIA had worked with them in the past, but when Hanley had snooped around on Court's behalf to get some contact information for the Legion, he'd learned that the resistance group had cut off all ties with the agency after a series of leaks had decimated their ranks. No one in the West seemed to have any contact with the FRL inside Russia anymore. Court said, You think this old lady and her old friends know people in the resistance? I do, Hanley said. The lady has a podcast now, mostly about Cold War stuff. It's in English, and I listen to it from time to time to learn about Russian activities in the Baltic. One thing I've noticed is that she doesn't ever talk about her time in the Cold War, and I'm guessing that's to protect people still inside Russia after 35 years. He added, Some of these people must still be active in the modern resistance, or at least they are aware of who is. Come on, Matt. This is all shallower than a pool of piss, Hanley said. She will know someone who can steer you to the right people. And then what? If you got on the ground there, linked up with a group of Legion fighters, then snatched some high-level Kremlin dickhead, maybe then you could truly find out what happened to Zoya. Hanley added. And then, when you learn the truth, you can get the fuck out of there. When Court did not respond, Hanley asked, Couldn't you potentially accomplish more doing that than you have managed to accomplish blasting your way across the Balkans? Court rubbed his exhausted eyes, tweaking his sore shoulder in the process. I don't know. He gazed out at the Megan across the shoreline avenue below. He thought about looking through his binos again, but decided he didn't need another check to confirm what he already knew. If he tried to get on board that ship, he'd die. And if he died, any chance Zoya had of getting out of Russia would die with him, because the CIA wasn't going to do a damn thing to help her. Blasting his way across the Balkans, as Hanley put it, had accomplished absolutely nothing. Hanley said, "Go talk to her. Just tell her you're an agency NOC. Tell her you need a way in, a friendly face beyond the border, contacts in the Legion." "Shallower than a pool of piss," Court said again, but softly. Finally, he added, "You can send me her address?" "Absolutely. Do you want me to get in touch with her first? Give her an official heads up that you're..." Court interrupted. "No, I'll go and evaluate. Do not tell her I'm coming." "We'll go. Just don't give her a heart attack. It's probably been a long time since she was operational, so she's not going to be ready for you. I can say from personal experience that waking up in the middle of the night to find you skulking through a bedroom is damn terrifying." Court rubbed his exhausted eyes again, then rolled his neck around. He was bruised from head to toe, maybe from rolling down a staircase, twice, in the Bucharest parking garage, maybe from the two-story car crash into the alleyway, maybe from the Semtex he detonated on the roof. He didn't know, and it didn't much matter. But he pushed the pain away. "Matt, Zoya, she's not dead. I can't explain it, but I know. I can feel it. She's out there, and she doesn't have much time. Just get to Riga, kid, and answer my calls. I'll try to help you from here. Tell me you believe me." Hanley let out a long breath. "You know me. I don't bullshit you. You've bullshit me more times than I can count. Okay, fair enough. I can't tell you that I believe Zoya is alive, but I can tell you that without any reservation, I support you." Court disconnected the call, put his phone in his pocket, stood on tired legs, and rubbed his sore shoulder as he looked out over the balcony at the ship, one last time. He did not feel hopeful about his prospects in Latvia, but on the whole he felt less hopeful about making his way to Russia on board the Medan. Latvia was to the north of him. Moving north and not east felt wrong, but he didn't know what was right anymore. He'd try Hanley's little scheme, see if that would take him any further than he'd managed to go on his own. He began walking through his hotel room for the door. He spoke again to himself, as he'd done so many times before. "She's not dead." 6. 300 miles southeast of Moscow, the Republic of Mordovia sits in the Volga River basin, a land of rolling plains, thick forests, and back-breaking industry. 15 prisons dot the settlements and forests of the district of Zubovo-Polyansky on the western side of the state, and the 15 prisons together are referred to by the Russian government as a penal fiefdom. Prisoners are a crop to be harvested and exploited here, just like the winter rye, corn, and lumber that are reaped in the region. The Moldovan prison system was developed in the 1930s as a part of the gulags of Joseph Stalin, which covered the territory controlled by the Soviet Union from Siberia to Ukraine. All of the detention camps here in western Mordovia came from that time, and they most definitely look like it. Crumbling walls, chipped paint, rusty iron, gravel roads, general dereliction. Over almost a century, hundreds of thousands labored and died inside the walls of the various facilities in the area. Deep in the middle of a dense forest lies the entrance to men's correctional colony IK-17 Orzeni, a male work detention facility with over 800 inmates and nearly 350 staff. There is a lumber mill and a sheet metal shop on the premises, as well as the housing wings, the administration buildings, the food service building, and a solitary confinement wing made out of poured concrete with broken glass in the cement ringing its roof. The prisoners here were killers, kidnappers, thieves, and enemies of the state. Of this last category, one man in the colony was known above all others. In fact, 46-year-old Natan Yarovoy was known all over the world. He had been an outspoken critic of the Kremlin and Russian President Vitaly Peskov. He'd defeated Peskov in the last election, though the results had been subsequently invalidated. Then, 3 years earlier, he was arrested and sent here to work in a prison lumber mill, 14 hours a day, probably until his inevitable death from the labor, the elements, the maltreatment, or a combination of the above. And Natan Yarovoy had been no stranger to maltreatment, even before prison. He had been attacked on the street in Moscow by skinheads when he was 26 for speaking out against the president. He'd survived a car bomb attempt when he was 35 for campaigning against the president. He'd been arrested 11 times by his 40th birthday, mostly for protesting the president. And he was poisoned by GRU agents while in Amsterdam a few years later for his international crusade against the president. And then, after he'd recovered from his exposure to the toxin Novichok, he'd made the astonishing decision to return to Russia to continue his fight there. He landed at Moscow's Vnukovo airport to wild fanfare from supporters, his wife Nadia by his side. But he never made it through customs. Instead, he was led away after kissing Nadia and telling her everything would be fine. Everything was not fine, as evidenced by the fact that he was now known as Inmate 21196-1365. Life was bleak for Natan Yarovoy, and it was also bleak for those who lived in the other correctional colonies of Zubovo-Polyansky. While IK-17 Orzeni is in the middle of a dense forest, 10 kilometers to the east of it lies a bustling place called Yavas. The Russians don't refer to Yavas and other areas like it as cities or towns. They are instead called urban localities or work settlements, and most of the 8,000 free citizens who live in Yavas labor in lumber processing. A cold rain fell in Yavas on this early November afternoon, melting last night's snowfall as the gray, overcast day neared 40 degrees, possibly for the last time until next spring. The nights had been well below freezing, however, and the strong winds down from the plains in the north made them feel even colder. A two-laned road called Chenerochenskia Ulitsa in the center of the settlement is lined with apartment blocks, warehouses, retail shops, and a small engine repair garage. But it dead ends on its eastern side at the front of a facility with a rusty iron gate, 10-foot-high metal and concrete walls, and a meter of coiled concertina wire above that. Evenly spaced wooden guard towers behind the walls shelter bored sharpshooters heavily bundled from the cold, and more armed guards man the front post by the gate. This is Women's Correctional Colony IK2, Yavas. The front gate of IK2 Yavas is green painted iron, the tint pared away by the years. This facility, like the men's prison in the woods 10 clicks to the west, was opened in 1931, though now replete with cameras and acoustic sensors and other pieces of modern technology. The bones of the structure look very much as they did 90 years earlier. IK2 Yavas is not a single large building with cells, but more of a village surrounded by fences and wire and guard towers. There was one famous prisoner incarcerated here as well, Nadia Yarovaya, Natan Yarovoy's wife. She'd left Russia after his arrest and been his outspoken champion, traveling the world to speak out against her husband's imprisonment and the criminal regime of Vitaly Peskov. And then, one night in Prague over a year ago, she disappeared, along with her 2 bodyguards. One of the guards was found floating in the Danube 36 hours later, and the other was discovered to be an agent for the FSB, the Russian State Security Service. Nadia turned up on trial in Moscow, and she was sentenced to Yavas for a term of 8 years, to serve within a few kilometers of her husband, but with no means to ever gaze upon him. It was an additionally cruel construct of her sentence. Passing through the western gate of IK2 Yavas, a gravel road heads east and then intersects other gravel roads, creating a network through nearly 24 buildings of different sizes, shapes, and construction. Nadia Yarovaya lived in the confinement wing, a 2-story block of a building closest to the southern fence line, and here she spent her days and many of her nights fabricating canvas belts for the Russian army. Just northeast of the confinement wing is the main residential zone, containing the dormitory-style housing cell blocks, then individual cell blocks, along with an administration building, a prison infirmary, a food hall, and even a maternity center and child care facility. A vast majority of the rest of the penal colony is taken up by the factories and shops where the prisoners work. Up the road at the end of the main north-south spine of the colony, A four-story drab gray structure sits between two other identical Soviet-era buildings. The sign outside is in Cyrillic, and it says simply, Building 7, Sewing Shops 1 through 3. On the second floor of Building 7, the third story up from the gravel street out front, a massive sweatshop buzzed and hummed on this Saturday afternoon. The smell of manufactured textiles, ink, body odor, dust, and mold pervasive. Populated by 124 inmates and some 20 colony staff, the space was a dizzying paradox of organization and chaos. The staff oversaw the room and guarded the prisoners, and 124 women labored over or around 90 sewing machines, each arrayed on a squat table pushed close to the others, bisected by a central aisle. The windows of the shop were barred. A fire here would mean certain death for most everyone. Both male and female guards with truncheons leaned against the walls, and the only noise that rose above the sounds of all the whirring machines was the nearly ever-present sound of iron clacking, as people came and went through the sweatshop's controlled access doors. All the workstations here were identical, as were the uniforms worn by the women sitting at them. Purple tunics and pants with silver reflective strips on the shoulders, forearms, and breast pockets, and down the sides of the legs. The inmates all wore headscarves that had once been white, but were now varying shades of gray. Prisoners hustled up the aisles, pushing rolling carts full of cut fabrics, while others pushed cardboard boxes and plastic bins around on hand trucks. Female supervisory guards moved from station to station, looking over the women's work, admonishing the slower ones with barking criticism. A quality control desk at the front of the room, just by the door, was staffed by prisoners who checked products for final inspection. Towards the rear of the room on row 8, to the left of the center aisle and halfway to the windows on the western wall, a prisoner took a cardboard box of black buttons from a passing cart, and then poured the contents into a metal hopper on the sewing table in front of her. She sat behind a black machine with the number 46 on the side, and this inmate had been working at Station 46 since 7 this morning, and she would be working here until 8 tonight. Unless, of course, she failed to reach her quota for the day, in which case she would work as long as she was required. Other than 15 minutes for lunch, plus 2 strictly enforced 5-minute bathroom breaks, and an hour in the afternoon doing mandatory calisthenics in the prison yard, the woman at Station 46 had not stopped working all day. In the middle of 123 other prisoners in the room, this woman seemed unremarkable. The headscarf, the uniform, the tired eyes, the pale skin, they were the same as the others here. She was younger than many, older than some, and something in her steady gaze at her work hinted at absolute despair, exactly like all the women around her. After her new box of buttons had been dropped into the bin, the 34-year-old Russian reached to her left and pulled a pair of rough, semi-constructed trousers from a canvas bag on the floor next to her, and she began sewing the buttons for the suspenders in place with the electric machine in front of her. This done, she expertly affixed the button above the fly. The zipper came next. It took longer, and she applied a little glue to the fabric just before stitching it up. It took her less than 3 minutes to complete her stage of the manufacturing process, and then she folded the trousers and slid them down to the table to her right, where they were snatched up by another prisoner, whose job it was to cuff the trousers and sew on the belt loops. No words were spoken between the two women. Several garments were produced in this room, but the women at Station 46, and the others on this row and the row behind them, were in charge of manufacturing the trousers of Layer 5, of the 8-layer VKPO all-season center field uniforms for the Russian Army. The uniforms were the product of BTG Group, a company that contracted with this penal colony for its slave labor, and IK2 Yavas's daily quota was 950 complete sets. Other women in this room produced the tunic of Layer 5, and on the first floor below and on the third floor above, they produced the other layers of the uniform: long johns, field jackets, rain gear, a heavy outer coat that protected the wearer to temperatures reaching 40 below zero Fahrenheit. The inmate at Machine 46 grabbed another pair of partially constructed trousers and a handful of buttons, and she went back to work on her 220th set of trousers of the already long day. Her eyes remained dead, her face remained sullen, but her hands worked methodically, quickly, adroitly. Although she might have looked similar to the other women held here, Zoya Fyodorovna, daughter of Fyodor, Zakharova, was in fact quite different. Zoya had been an officer in the SVR, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. She'd fled from the nation of her birth some 3 years earlier. The Kremlin had accused her of murdering another Russian spy, and then placed a capture-kill order on her. And she'd lived on the run for some time, before then being apprehended by a Chinese agent in Cuba 6 months earlier. The Chinese knew the Russians were looking for this woman, so they traded her to Moscow for a Chinese spy the Russians had been holding. Zoya wasn't thinking about any of this at the moment. Now, and presumably for the rest of her life, nothing from her past really mattered. All that mattered were buttons and trousers and zippers, her bunk and her food, the aches in her arms and legs, the cough that would not go away, the cold air that kept her up at night. She thought of escape when she had the energy and focus to think of other things, and she even had little running fantasies in her mind about how she could get out of here. But at her core, she didn't think she had a chance in hell. Her mind was on the buttons now. She told herself her productivity had been good today, meaning she'd be done by 8. But just as she reached for another set of trousers, she looked up briefly and saw the main door to the shop opening, and 3 uniformed guards entering. They looked around a moment, then began walking purposefully between the machines, taking the central row through the workstations. Zoya wondered which of the 123 other women here they were planning on fucking with. She put this out of her mind, not her problem, and she looked back down to her work, which remained very much her problem. Zoya had been here at IK2 Yavas for 2.5 months, after spending over 3 months in Moscow, mostly in solitary confinement at Lefartova prison. She'd spent the first couple of weeks here in quarantine block, mostly in solitary, to be evaluated medically and socially by the staff. After some early concerns, she was deemed to be neither a regime violator nor a self-harm threat, so she was assigned to an otriad, a department. The department was her community. It told her what group she belonged to, and it determined her fate. Zoya was a member of 4th Brigade, and she lived with her brigade, worked with her brigade, ate with her brigade, even spent an hour in the common yard exercising every afternoon with her brigade. This was her identity now. After stitching a suspender button in place, she flipped the garment and glanced back up at the room. And when she did so, she saw all 3 of the guards who'd just entered, now standing directly in front of her station. She launched up from her chair quickly and held herself at attention, her hands down tight to her sides. Before the guards spoke, she shouted over the sounds of the machines around her, which had lessened somewhat with the arrival of the guards as the other inmates stopped what they were doing to steal glances at the activity. Zoya belted out a string of numbers. 188835-7379. The guard in the middle, a round-faced man in his 20s who was missing 3 fingers on his left hand, nodded. 7379. Come with us. She glanced back down to her work quickly. So many buttons and zippers remaining, and she knew her supervisors wouldn't take into consideration the fact that she'd been called away in the middle of her shift. If this, whatever this was, took any time at all, she'd be here working at her station until late in the evening. But she did as ordered. Rule following made life significantly less unbearable around here. She stepped out to the aisle. 2 guards walked behind her as she followed the round-faced guard back out through the western doors, and they all headed along a sterile hallway, well lit by halogen bulbs above. A minute later, she walked with them in the cold rain, marching south, passing another sewing shop and a massive warehouse building. And a couple of minutes after this, they approached the administration building. The decaying 90-year-old structure had chips in the paint and rusty iron doors. Ivy had snaked several meters up the walls before dying, and it only made the facade look sadder and more foreboding. 4 black armored all-terrain infantry mobility vehicles sat parked in front of the building, and men in full black body armor stood around them, rifles on their chests, tinted visors hiding their faces, helmets protecting their heads. Zoya recognized the vehicles. They were tigers, in use by all sorts of agencies here in the country. Russia was full of jackbooted paramilitary groups. Every organization from local law enforcement to the National Guard to the park police had their own force of shock troops and head knockers. Such was the structure of a troop release state. But Zoya's heart pounded now as she realized what outfit these men and machines belonged to. They were FSB, Russian Internal Security, and they were Directorate A of the FSB's Special Purpose Center, though they were most commonly known as Alpha Group, the most elite counterterrorism unit in the nation. Zoya had no idea what these people were doing here, but she had a sinking suspicion that it had something to do with her. As she passed them by, she thought the Alpha Group goons looked like robots with all the rain-drenched polymer armor and their full headgear and blacked-out visors, and she couldn't even tell if they were looking her way. Once through the main door, it occurred to her that she'd never been inside this building, and for a moment she wondered if that meant she was going to be released. But then the sudden ebullience subsided, because Zoya realized it was just as likely that she would be shot, or transferred to another prison, or sent back to Moscow, to the torture chambers at the Farnava. She walked down a wide hall that looked like every other of the 1,000 or so communist-era office buildings she'd been in her life, and she passed the warden's office. She'd met Warden Maximov during her quarantine block days. He was a stiff and sullen man who wore his green dress uniform and his dress cap as if he were a general, and he enjoyed bragging to her that he'd served in the army and that his brother was currently a major in military intelligence. He also informed her that he was a proud Stalinist, and no matter what the rest of the world had led her to believe, here within the walls of IK2 Yavas, it was still 1950. Next year, he proclaimed, would be 1950, as would the year after that. He stated this proudly, with a twinkle in his eye, and Zoya thought it likely the man was insane. "This place will do that to you," she'd reasoned at the time. They took a staircase down a single floor. It occurred to her that down often meant bad in prison, and when they stepped back out into a corridor, she slowed markedly. The lighting was low here, the walls tight. It was cold, and a row of closed steel doors ran down each side. She slowed a step, and the two men behind her took her by the arm and sped her up. "Torture," she told herself, and she immediately began trying to disassociate, to get her mind ready to shut down so that she could weather whatever the fuck was about to happen to her, just as she'd done in Moscow. They stopped at the first door on the right. A pair of Alpha Group men stood at attention here, but the guards did not address them. Instead, the round-faced guard knocked on the door with his damaged hand, and a male voice from the inside told him to enter. Zoya was half pushed into an interrogation room that was much brighter than the corridor outside. The walls of the room were painted brick, heavily flaked and almost gray, though she imagined they had once been a clean white. The air was icy cold. A single wooden desk sat in the center of the small space, a chair on her side with metal eye bolts in both the floor in front of it and on the chair arms. The far wall had a large mirror on it. Zoya knew there would be people watching, and perhaps recording her from the other side. This interrogation room had no doubt been used thousands, tens of thousands of times in the past 90 years, and Zoya shuddered, thinking about the outcomes of most of those interrogations. A lean man sat comfortably on the other side of the desk in a cushioned swivel chair, his legs crossed. He wore a dark blue ski jacket with a white collar and a thin red tie, just exposed above the zipper. Civilian attire and neat, Zoya's. His hair was flecked with gray, but still mostly dark brown, slicked back and longer than most Russian men kept their hair. His face looked drawn and tired. He had dark circles under his eyes. Although he was probably no more than a decade older than her, he looked to Zoya like he was either unhealthy or under an incredible amount of stress. Perhaps both. She had no idea what was in store, but she saw no torture implements in the room, so she took that as a positive sign. And then she saw an even more encouraging sign. To her astonishment, steam rose from two porcelain teacups sitting on the table. Zoya hadn't held a porcelain cup in half a year. "Restraint, sir?" The round-faced guard asked the man at the table. The seated man waved a hand in the air, as if scoffing at the idea. With a surprisingly energetic voice, he said, "Won't be necessary. We're just going to have a quick, informal chat." The guards were waved out by the seated man a moment later, and with another sweep of the hand, he indicated the chair across the desk from him. She sat down, well aware that no informal chat had ever taken place in this room since the day it had been constructed. Zoya was an expert on languages and dialects. This man was well educated, perhaps from Moscow, perhaps east of Moscow. He didn't sound that much different than her guards, but there was something in his voice that commanded attention and respect. He had a sheaf of papers in front of him. There had been a small backpack next to the desk that she'd noticed upon entering, but she saw nothing else. She did not speak, did not look the man in the eyes. She kept her gaze on the desk between them. Finally, he said, "Relax. Whatever you think this is, it is not that." Zoya's eyes flicked up, then back down. She remained silent. "Name?" he asked. 188835-7379. The man across the table gave a tired chuckle. When he finished, he said, "That tea is for you. Tell me if it's too sweet." She hesitated, wondered if it might be polonium, then discounted the thought. If someone wanted to kill her, they would just pull out a gun and shoot her between the eyes, then bury her in the frozen ground nearby, or cart her out to the forest and leave her for the wolves. Nobody was going to waste precious polonium on her. She took a sip. The tea was like candy, utterly magnificent. She put the cup back on the table and shook her head, indicating that it was not too sweet. He said, "Let's try again. Name?" Zoya was confused. She was under special regime rules. She'd been ordered to never use her name here at IK2 Yavas. No one here knew who she was, and she was not going to violate that. Again, with her head down, she said, 188835-73. The man interrupted. "It's only been a few months, Zoya. I know it's no picnic here, but surely they haven't completely relieved you of your identity." 7. Now she looked up at the man and saw that he did not look familiar to her at all. She said, "Sir?" He seemed to sense what she was thinking. "We've never met, but I have seen a portion of your file. So, I almost feel like we're old friends." He tapped the sheaf of papers in front of him, but did not consult them as he began to recite her full name, date of birth, place of birth, schooling, even parts of her service with foreign intelligence. By the time he'd finished, Zoya's eyes were back on the desk. She did not know what was happening, but assumed it was nothing good. The man across from her said, "My name is Major Colonel Alex Leonidovich Baronev, and I am at your service, Miss Zakharova. I will be transparent with you," he said, and then took a sip of his tea. Zoya took another sip herself, her gaze back down at the table. She'd learned not to hold eye contact with anyone for long, and she thought that, despite his apparent charm, this man had just told his second lie in the past 10 seconds. He was not at her service, and he was not going to be transparent with her. He waved a hand in the air. "You're not in any trouble. This is not an interrogation." He took a couple more sips of tea, seemingly considering his words. Then he surprised her by speaking English. "I am told your English is quite good." "I prefer to speak Russian," she said softly, and in Russian. Voronov grinned at her suddenly, an uneven, toothy smile that did not reach up to his eyes. Then he continued in Russian. "I know you were SBR. I know you defected. And I know there was an Odessa order placed on you." She made no movement, said nothing. "Odessa is the Kremlin's highest sanction," Voronov went on. "Capture or kill. Extreme prejudice." He paused. "That's all I know." But then he quickly raised a hand. "I mean," he said, "obviously I know you were captured. Otherwise this conversation would be even more one-sided than it already is." Zoya looked up to see him still holding a crooked smile, looking at her, through her. She remained reserved. You are a major colonel, sir? The smile went away, and he nodded. FSB, in the Department for the Protection of the Constitutional System and the Fight Against Terrorism. I'm based at the Lubyanka. I helicoptered down here from Moscow to see someone in another correctional colony nearby, but I thought I would take the opportunity to speak with you while I was here. He jerked a thumb at the door. Alpha Group picked me up at the airport and brought me. He shrugged. FSB Major Colonels traveling alone these days must be careful. Zoya could not fathom why this high-ranking intelligence officer had come to see her, but she made no reaction. He changed the subject quickly, catching her off guard. Your friends in the West think you are dead. Did you know that? She did not know that. Slowly, she shook her head. The woman was executed at Lefortova while you were there. She had previously been in the SVR. You might have known her. Sorokina was her name, if I'm not mistaken. Zoya looked up. She did know Ina Sorokina. She'd been SVR, and then went to work for a Moscow-based criminal organization. Zoya had run afoul of her in Berlin a year earlier, but she betrayed none of this. She only sat still, stared at the table. Voronov shrugged. Anyway, the Kremlin put her on ice. No idea why. Your friends, the Americans, somehow picked up that little tidbit. Didn't get the name, and they surmised it was you. Zoya's heart did not have the capacity to sink even lower, so this news did little to darken her already pitch-black outlook. One more thing I do know about you, Voronov said, as if it just occurred to him, is your father. Not personally, of course, but I am very aware of the lasting legend of General Fyodor Zakharov. He paused for emphasis, then said, former head of the GRU. He enunciated each letter of the abbreviation of Russian military intelligence with an unmistakable tone of derision. Leaning forward, he briefly glanced at the mirror on his right, then back at Zoya. My own father remains an important part of my life. He's retired, not dead as is yours, but I now hold the equivalent job that he held back in his prime, Voronov said. He was KGB, naturally, in Moscow mostly, and then, after the abrupt end of the Soviet Union, he joined the FSB. He interrogated enemies of the state. Voronov waved his hand around. In this very room on occasion, I feel certain of it. My father was quite something in his day, in fact. Do you know what he gave me? Issues? Voronov looked like he'd been poleaxed, but only for a moment, then barked out a genuine laugh. She doesn't speak much, but when she does, it's with snark. Now his demeanor changed. He beamed at her. I like it. Growing serious again, he said. Yes, issues. But more importantly, he gave me a dogged determination, an almost fanatical will to do my job and to do it to the best of my ability. Zoya could not help herself. What is your job? I hunt for internal enemies. Just like my father, my own life is dedicated to catching spies, terrorists, and traitors. Then I'm afraid you're wasting your time with me, Colonel. I was a spy, but as you can plainly see, I've already been caught. Voronov laughed again. True, but I'm not after you. Hunting spies and terrorists and traitors is all very good. But my job is more than that. My job is re-educating the public. Every time I throw a traitor in jail, a protester, an instigator, a subversive, it's on the news. For every one enemy of state I take off the playing field, another 100, 1,000 get the message that whatever scheme they have in mind is not going to work. Because people like me are out here, hounding them, trailing them, stalking them, hunting them down, thwarting their plans. What does that have to do with me? She asked. I intend on finding out who's put you here. Warden Maximov says he got orders from the court in Saransk. Saransk says it got orders from the Federal Penitentiary Service in Moscow, and FPS refuses to communicate with FSB on the matter, as do SVR and GRU. The colonel continued. So, for whatever reason, Sorokinov was executed and you were not. Not only were you not killed, I've seen the records. You were subjected to some pretty harsh special measures, but you were not tortured in the true sense. Zoya continued staring at the dirty wooden table as she said, mock executions, refrigerated cell, rotten rations, sleep deprivation. Should I go on? Baroness sniffed, as if what she'd said had been a joke. Trust me, you got off easy. And then, after a few months at Lefortova, you were sentenced to a correctional colony. He looked around. Again, you got off easy. Believe me, this isn't the worst place to be stuck. She took a sip of hot tea, and Baronov added, I am trying to figure out why exactly you are here. She looked up at him briefly again. Me too, Colonel Baronov. Odessa-sanctioned targets are not remanded to correctional colonies. I've never seen it happen, not once. In fact, I've never seen what happened to any Odessa targets, because they simply disappeared. But you are in with the general prison population here in Yavas. Why? Why aren't you dead? Or why aren't you in a 2-meter by 3-meter windowless cage at Lefortova? Why weren't you tortured, truly tortured, for information in Moscow? Are you being protected by someone high-ranking enough to spare you the usual fate of a poor wretch in your shoes? That's what I need to find out. Zoya looked the man in the eyes. I ask myself every day why they did not shoot me when I was in Moscow. Voronov's own eyes went cold now. You would not be so fortunate, I'm afraid. The Kremlin has thrown people into furnaces, people who weren't Odessa. Word is Sorokinov was hanged by SVR, which seems rather charitable, but I don't know. I had nothing to do with her. He smiled. I'm FSB. We don't play well with SVR. The remark about throwing her into a furnace did not faze Zoya. She had grown numb to threats and dangers. She could do nothing to improve her situation, so she accepted whatever happened as fate. Do you have a benefactor in the government keeping you alive? Some old friend of your father in military intelligence, perhaps? He smiled again. FSB does not play well with GRU either. Zoya said
Come
nothing,
on, man,
but she
go.
felt his eyes as they bored into her for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, he spoke with unmasked malevolence. Who is your sugar daddy, Zoya? I don't have him. You worked for SPR, and your dearly departed father was GRU. Someone extremely high up in one of those two organizations is behind this. He waved his hand animatedly, indicating Zoya's incarceration here. I've gone to the Kremlin, but I've learned nothing. We at FSB do not trust SVR, but we trust GRU even less. Whoever arranged for a traitorous spy to be put in a labor colony in Mordovia instead of a shallow grave in a field outside the capital will be revealed. I can assure you. His lips thin and his eyes darkened. There are threats to this nation even inside our own intelligence services. No matter how high this goes, I intend to find this enemy in the one who has put you here. Zoya brought her shoulders back a little and looked up at the man. I understand. This isn't about me. This is about a fight between Russia's intelligence organizations. You want to get SVR or GRU a black eye. Nothing more. Baronov bristled again. Zoya was struck by how quickly the man's mood and demeanor could change. Through tight lips, he said, not a black eye, a fatal blow. President Peskov favors GRU. He has a soft spot for the leadership in the SBR, and his relationship with FSB has, as a result, suffered. Baronov smiled once more, as if he'd forgotten that she defended him seconds earlier. He said, if I find out one of Russia's most wanted was spared by either one of those organizations, then I will take that information directly to the Kremlin. Zoya said, I have no friends in high places. I don't even have any friends here. Baronov smiled a little. picked a tea leaf from his tongue with his fingertips, but he made no reply to it. Instead, he said, 4 years here. It's not nothing, but it is not such a long time. It is, if it is a lie. No one is letting me out in 4 years. I'll die either here or somewhere else. There is no benefactor crew. Someone in SVR thought it would be more fun to send me somewhere so I could be worked to death. She added, Ines Rokina gets to rest. I envy her. Baronev drummed his fingers on the desk. Said it yourself. I don't care so much about you. You killed a co-worker in foreign intelligence and then ran to the West. Utterly boring stuff, in my opinion. Then he sat up straighter. I will be frank, Miss Sakharova. I'm going to find out who's protecting you, and then I'm going to have them arrested for treason. I will see that their organization is utterly destroyed by the affair. When that happens, there can only be one result for you. Zoya nodded faintly, then spoke softly. I won't have to envy Ina for long. He nodded again. If I do my job well, it will end with your execution. Yes. The next time you see my face, you can be sure it will mean the end for you. With a little shrug, he said, still with nonchalance. And I regret that. It's nothing personal, but it's my life's mission to find turncoats in the other intelligence services so the motherland remains strong. And in this case, doing this means you will necessarily be collateral damage. She pushed a little force into her voice for the first time in the conversation, as she sat up straighter. Well then, Colonel Baronev, I guess you had better get to work. Baronev stared at her with rapt fascination. You're either incredibly brave, or an incredibly good actress, or someone who is simply tired of sewing zippers and buttons. The colonel let out a loud laugh now. Or that, yes. He stood abruptly, then called for the guard. You are a charming woman. You must have been one hell of a spy. It's been a pleasure meeting you. She could have charmed him a little more, she knew. Told him it had been a pleasure meeting him as well. But her efforts wouldn't change her fate. She just turned and headed for the door, where the round-faced guard missing part of his hand and his partner were waiting for her. 5 minutes later, the prisoner had been led back to Building 7, and RX Baronev stood in the observation room on the other side of the two-way mirror in the interrogation room. With him were both Warden Albert Maximov and a female senior supervisory guard, both of whom had only known the prisoner as 7379 before now. The two of them had watched the entire exchange through the mirror, something that Baronev had approved of. So now they were aware of her true identity. Baronev pulled a page out of the file in his hand and looked at it. It was a color print of Zakharova's SVR identity photo, a few years old now. In the photo, she wore makeup and an off-white blouse and a blue jacket over it, and her hair was long, dark, and shiny. Baronev noted that she looked quite stunning and completely different from the woman he'd just met. She was still beautiful here in prison, but haggard, worn, robbed of any of the spirit the colonel could see in the photo in his hand. To the guard, he said,
Damn, bitch.
Tell me about her. The woman was in her 50s, stern, but clearly excited to be in the presence of the senior FSB officer down from Moscow. She's basically catatonic, Colonel. She just goes about her day. She's a robot, really. How so? She works in the shop, but only communicates with her superiors there when spoken to. We watch her, making sure to follow the special administrative rules that came down. The guard added, The other inmates know better than to fuck with her. The rumor is she was at a holding facility in Moscow several months ago, and she broke a woman's jaw. Baronev did not look up from the paper in his hand. More than a rumor. It happened at Lefartova. She was in with the general population for less than a day before she took that swing. She went to solitary directly afterward. The female guard chuckled a little. Wish she'd try something with me. I'd relieve her of the last of her beauty. Right, Baronev muttered, looking at Zakharova's picture on the computer. Has she had any contact with Nadia Yarovaya? Warden Maximov shook his head. Not at all. As you already know, the traitor Yarovaya is housed in the confinement wing, Block 2. She works in an annex shop there in the building, not in the main sewing shop. She gets 30 minutes a day outside in a pen, but otherwise, she's working, eating, or sleeping. The female guard spoke up again. 7379 is nothing to worry about, sir. She's weird. When she walks the halls or the roads outside, she usually does it with her eyes closed. She doesn't want to see anyone around her. Voronev sighed, rubbed his tired eyes. That's not what she's doing. She's memorizing the routes, the turns, the number of steps, in case she must move quickly through the facility with the lights off. How do you... I've been doing this a long time, and a long time before this, my father was doing this, and telling me all about it. Yes, sir. He thought a moment, then said, No one from GRU or SVR has inquired about her? No one, Colonel, Maximov answered. The older man hesitated before speaking again, but then he said, Odessa sanction, you said? I don't know what that is. Voronev addressed them both now. You heard a lot in there, a lot you don't need to know. You would do well to remember, to forget. He turned to the door. Notify me of any developments with Zakharova, no matter the hour. Are you returning to Moscow, Colonel? The female guard asked. Not immediately. I have business at IK-17 or Zenit tomorrow. Are you interrogating the traitor Yarovoy there? Voronev looked at her a moment, then shook his head. Yarovoy has nothing left to offer us. With a shrug, he said, He was yesterday's project, as was his wife. He held the file up. This prisoner is today's project. Watch her carefully in the meantime. There is more to 7379 than meets the eye. She will not deviate from her duties, Warden Maximov said. If she does, she will be punished. Zoya Zakharova finished her shift at 9:20 p.m., then shut her eyes at her table a moment, trying in vain to clear them of the images of buttons and trousers and zippers that were so burned into her retinas. 5 minutes later, she'd been cleared by the guards to leave the shop and return to her barracks. An icy rain fell in sheets as Zoya trudged across the gravel with 3 other women, also cleared for the movement at this late hour. In the dormitory wing, she took her tired and aching body to the shower room, rinsed off, changed back into her uniform, and then went straight to her bunk bed. Her cough was bothering her, but no more so than most nights, and certainly no worse than at least 15 of the 80 women in this building. The sound of hacking and wheezing all night long was the rule around here, not the exception. As she lay on the bottom bunk on her side, her eyes closed as she did her best to push the images from the sweatshop out of her mind for a few hours, before going back tomorrow for her 12-hour Sunday shift. Her thoughts slipped to Voronev. Why was the FSB bothering her? She'd been in Moscow under weeks of interrogation, and she hadn't cracked. Some drugs had been injected into her, but she'd kept her head about the most important secrets she had. Yes, she remembered that she'd admitted that she'd killed an SVR officer in Thailand, though he'd been trying to kill her. And yes, she'd admitted she'd fled Russia, and she'd even admitted she'd worked freelance for the CIA, both in Berlin and in Cuba. The Russians knew this already. Denying it would have been futile. She'd spoken reservedly about the operation in Cuba, but had said nothing about the man she'd been with at the time. She would die before she mentioned the name Court Gentry. Shortly after her arrival to Lefortovo prison, she'd been put into solitary for punching out another inmate who'd pushed her against the wall and declared her to be fresh meat. The other prisoner went down with a cracked jaw that would ensure she'd be getting no meat that wasn't minced and floating in soup for some time. After this, Zoya had been locked in a refrigerated cell with no blankets to increase her punishment. Her rations had been cut, and at one point, she woke up in the hospital wing after passing out and landing face first on the concrete floor of her cell. Badly bruised, she lay in bed for several days at Lefortovo, and when she was released, the interrogations stopped, and she was shipped down here to Mordovia, first to Saransk, and then here to Yavas. She wondered if she was being held to trade for some Russian spy in the West, or like she'd said to Baronev, simply sent here to die slowly and miserably. Zoya had considered suicide, early on and only briefly. If court gentry had been here instead of her, he would have already made a mad dash for the fence, not for the purpose of escape, but for the purpose of catching a bullet in the back from a watchtower sniper, a surefire way to keep from spilling secrets. But Zoya didn't want to die. She wanted to live, and she wanted to get out of here. Still, escape was a fantasy. She barely had time to use the bathroom, sleep, and eat. How the fuck was she going to dig a tunnel? She tried to relax enough to fall asleep, knowing she'd be up by 6 and back at the sewing shop by 7. It was Sunday, so tomorrow's shift would last till 5 p.m., and her guards called this a half-day. Their math was as bad as their disposition, Zoya told herself, as she closed her eyes and did her best to ignore the sounds of misery around her. 8. The red and gray commuter train rolled through the darkness, the rain, and the dense fog, moving at 80 kilometers an hour across a gentle stretch of track in the woods, just a couple of kilometers from a suburban station ahead. The Obninsk railway station didn't see much passenger traffic after 10 p.m., but it was just 100 kilometers from the southwestern neighborhoods of Moscow, so a few trains ran through still after most of the townspeople here in the city of 125,000 had gone to bed. It was past 11 p.m. now. This was the last train of the night from Moscow, and there were no more than 75 passengers on board as the 9 railway cars neared the stop. In the first car, a couple in their 20s got ready to disembark, donning their coats, scarves, and hats. Leonid and Tatiana covered their faces completely. They knew that cold and precipitation would hit them the moment they climbed down onto the platform. They each kept a hand on their large rolling suitcases out in the aisle to keep them from falling over when the train stopped. The commuter train did begin to slow, and in the 8th car, 2 men sat together. A pair of mismatched backpacks had been stacked in an empty seat between them. Kostya thumbed through his phone, and Dennis looked out the window at the night. The pair already had their faces covered, as did many of the passengers on board, and Dennis put his forehead against the window now. His ski mask warded off the shock of cold from the glass. And that was too bad, because Dennis's headache was back, and the cold would have helped a little. The headache always came in times of high stress, and this moment certainly fit the bill. Denis Moskayev had suffered recurring headaches for the past 2 years, but it was no mystery as to why. A traumatic brain injury that he'd hardly received any treatment for was the culprit. As a sergeant in the 173rd Special Purpose Spetsnaz detachment of the 22nd Guards Brigade, he'd been blown out of a second-story apartment window in Avdiivka. A Ukrainian with a grenade launcher had scored a hit that had killed 3 of Denis's comrades and sent him sailing. He woke with head and back injuries and barely survived the blood loss from wounds in both legs before he was rescued by surviving members of his squad. There was one silver lining for Denis Moskayev after he was transported back over the border to a military hospital in Belgorod. His war was over. He'd healed over time, more or less, though the headaches remained a near constant companion. He'd spent months living at home with his mother, drinking away his meager military pension, but finally a friend of his family had offered the military hero a job as a stalker at a grocery store in Moscow's central Rostokino district. During the day, he put cereal, dairy items, soft drinks, and candy on shelves. And for the past year, he did something quite different at night, because Denis was not a good grocer. But he did have other skills, and he also had something else. A calling. Denis Moskayev was a saboteur, serving in a cell of the Freedom of Russia Legion. The rebels of the Legion had grown from a few dozen Russian nationals fighting in the eastern oblasts of Ukraine on the side of the Ukrainians into a large, amorphous body of cells, active in several cities inside Russia. Denis was deputy commander of a cell of 24 members, 6 of whom were on this train, including his commander, Leonid. He found himself filled with apprehension now, and he calmed himself as he always did, by thinking of his mother. She was only 53, still healthy and vibrant, unlike his father, who had died when he was young. His mother was beautiful and kind and smart and funny. Thinking of her enabled him to go on with his day. She knew the war was foolish, same as Dennis did. But also, like Dennis, she had the good sense to keep her mouth shut about her opinions in front of others. You could go to prison in Russia for speaking out against the war, even in the mildest of terms. Dennis looked forward to the time when he could go back to the home he grew up in and give his mother a big hug that he was certain would last a long time, until she pulled herself away long enough to make him a huge platter of sirniki, lemony cheese pancakes covered in blueberries from her garden, his favorite food since childhood. The train came to a smooth stop. Kostya elbowed him across the backpacks to snap him out of his contemplations, and soon both men stood. Kostya was older, a former tank gunner now in his early 40s, and a
Come
bit
on, man,
thick
all
around
black,
the
the
middle,
motherfucker.
and he made a show of hoisting his large beige pack off the seat. He struggled to shoulder it, and began moving for the exit. Dennis hoisted the remaining pack. It was a washed-out canvas bag, utterly inconspicuous. He put it on without difficulty, unlike the other man, and then he followed Kostya for the exit. Up and down the 9-car train from Moscow, a total of 11 people were disgorged here, before the doors shut and it began moving south again, towards its final destination for the night, another 30 kilometers to the southwest. All 11 commuters walked through the station, some pulling luggage along with them, everyone with some sort of backpack or shoulder bag. 5 headed out into the rain and sleet to the parking lot, where they climbed into the shelter of their cars. But the remaining 6 walked through the station and out to the street in 3 sets of 2. Leonid and Tatiana from the first car, Sasha and Dima from car 5, Dennis and Kostya from car 8. Under the overhang above the entrance, Leonid and Tatiana stopped to look at their phones. Dennis and Kostya took a moment to organize their belongings, and the other 2 men began walking directly to the southwest along the sidewalk. None of the 3 pairs looked at or spoke to one another, but within a minute of exiting the station, they all walked in the same direction on the same sidewalk, each group spread out by 30 or 40 meters. They trudged on the slick pavement, their heads and faces covered, exactly like any sensible person walking around in the snow and ice on a frosty night. Leonid and Tatiana struggled a little with their heavy rolling bags, but they pressed on. A row of 2-story homes ran down the opposite side of the quiet street, and on their side of the street, pine trees hid the train tracks on the left. The 3 pairs might not have looked like a cohesive unit of any kind, as they sat in different cars on the train or walked separately along the roadside, but they were in fact together. Leonid was the leader of this cell. He was 34, and he and his 28-year-old partner Tatiana walked in the center of the scraggly, clandestine entourage. Sasha and Dima had made it 200 meters from the station when they suddenly turned to the left, stepped off the sidewalk, and began moving through the snow and mud for 10 meters until they reached a thick copse of pine. Leonid and Tatiana followed suit when they got to the same part of the sidewalk, both of them dragging their big and heavy suitcases behind them. They lumbered downhill until they pushed themselves into the trees. The third pair, Dennis and his older partner Kostya, checked behind them as they walked, making certain no one was standing around outside the station who might have seen the first 4 hustle into the trees. Satisfied they had not been detected, they stepped off the pavement and into the muddy snow, hurrying towards the woods, following in the tracks made by the others. Soon Dennis was enshrouded in darkness with the others, out of the streetlights and the light poles along the train tracks that ran on the other side of the pines. His head throbbed, but he tried to push the pain away, because the next 10 minutes would be crucial. The group now huddled close together, protected by the elements from the pine needles above them, and they waited in silence for a moment. Then, after determining that no one in any of the nearby homes had taken any note of their presence, they began moving carefully through the woods, their boots and tennis shoes fighting for purchase on the uneven and soggy ground. It only took seconds to push all the way through to the other side of the trees, and when they did so, Dennis, Leonid, Tatiana, and the rest of the group found themselves standing only 20 meters away from the southbound train tracks. With a nod from Leonid, they all retreated back into the woods, then dropped their packs and began rifling through them. The six, ranging in age from 21 to 45, each pulled a pistol and a pair of extra magazines from their packs, then crammed the weapons into their waistbands under their thick coats. Dennis, Kostya, and Dima also took out Vitya's submachine guns, extended the stocks, and put the slings over their heads. Several of the group pulled smoke grenades, extra magazines, medical bags, and other equipment from their packs, and stuffed them in the big pockets of their coats. Then Leonid and Tatiana opened the two big rolling cases. With the aid of a small, red-lensed flashlight, they looked inside. Leonid flipped some switches on the two devices, and when he was done, the lids of the suitcases were again zippered closed. With a look at her phone to check the time, Tatiana gave a little nod to the leader of the group, and then four men hefted the two big cases, one of them holding the front and the other the rear. And then all six began heading out of the trees and towards the tracks. Dennis held the bottom of the second case. His heart pounded along with the throbbing in his skull as he moved quickly over the uneven and slick ground. He was thankful for the sleet and the fog, but well aware he was entering the lighted area of track just a couple hundred meters south of the station. While Tatiana and Kostya covered the others with their weapons, looking out into the night for any potential threats, the other four struggled to climb up onto the southbound track with the luggage. Once there, they positioned the cases side by side right next to the closest rail, and then the group picked up granite ballast stones and made a perfunctory attempt to hide the large containers. A single light appeared far to the north, approaching from the direction of Moscow, and this turned everyone's heads, but only for an instant. Dennis didn't need to check his watch again, and he didn't have to wonder about what was coming his way. The 20-car freight train was right on time, just like most nights, and he knew it would be composed of a mixture of fuel tanker cars and flatbeds carrying military equipment towards the troops in Donbass. As the big train raced closer to the station, it would not be stopping. All six stepped over the southbound track and then began crossing the northbound track, not returning to the trees from where they came, but rather heading towards a fenced warehouse complex 50 meters beyond the rail line. They were out of the glowing lights, over the tracks, and halfway to the big chain-link fence, the intermittent whistle of the train audible and growing in volume off their left shoulders, when Leonid pulled his phone from his coat. Still moving quickly, he dialed a number but did not yet hit the call button. And then, when they were just 20 meters from the fence line, a bright light swept over them from behind. Everyone dropped into the mud and tall grasses here, and then Leonid looked back, raising his head to see. Next to him, Dennis did the same with his gun at his shoulder, but he partially shielded himself behind a discarded iron train car wheel that was propped up against a stack of wooden pallets. Dennis focused on the movement to the north. "Dirmo," he said. "Shit." A pair of green armored trucks rolled to a stop to the south of the copse of trees the six Russians had just come from, 40 meters away. From the roof of one of the trucks, a man waved a flashlight back and forth over the tracks. "Who the fuck is that?" Leonid whispered. Dennis couldn't read any writing on the vehicles through the dense fog. "No clue." The train was 45 seconds out or so. Dennis looked back over his shoulder towards the fence and the warehouse and determined there was no chance of them making it there without being detected by whoever it was in those trucks. Turning his attention back to the vehicles, he saw several men climbing out now. They wore green masks and helmets and camouflaged body armor, and they all carried rifles with flashlights mounted under their barrels. A half-dozen more beams swept the tracks now, searching intently, but not focused on any one area. Now Moscow fixated on the men, on the equipment he could see. After a few seconds more, he let out a grumble of frustration, then growled, "SOBR." "Fuck!" Tatiana exclaimed softly behind him. SOBR was the Special Quick Response Unit of the Rosgvardia, a public order force created by President Vitaly Peskov to keep the citizenry in line. "Why are the National Guard SWAT troops here?" Leonid asked, his voice fraught with nerves now. "We got spotted on a camera," someone said. "Bullshit we did," Kostya whispered. "Somebody ducked." Dennis looked to Leonid. The man was crouched in the grasses, his jeans soaked and muddy, his handgun in one hand and his cell phone in the other. "Continue the op," Dennis said. When Leonid looked back at him with wide eyes, however, Dennis got the idea that his leader was panicking. "What the fuck are we going to do, Leo?" he said, the train getting louder and louder to their right. I don't know." Dennis knew what they needed to do. "Close the track. When the train derails, we move." "No," the team leader said. "They don't see us. If the train moves on, they will just leave." The train raced through the station now, just 20 seconds from passing between the internal security troops and this small band of saboteurs hiding in the grasses. Dennis said, "We have to do it. Press the button." Leonid did not move. "Make up your mind." Kostya barked from behind them. Leonid lifted his head again to take another look at the situation. A sudden burst of gunfire erupted from the direction of the two green trucks. With the racing train just 15 seconds out, bullets tore through the tall, dead brush around the 6 Russians. Dennis threw himself flat in the icy mud behind the wheel, but next to him, Leonid cried out in shock. When the gunfire ceased, likely because the train was about to block the shooter's line of sight, Dennis crawled out of the mud and onto Leonid. A rifle round had exited his back, the top of the cell leader's skull was gone, and brain oozed through his blonde hair. But Dennis did not focus on his leader's fatal wounds. Instead, he pulled the phone from the dead man's hand and pressed the call button. As he threw himself down flat alongside his dead comrade, a white light explosion rocked the group, soaking in the freezing rain. The sound and flash were
I'll park right by 7-Eleven.
Xe có đậu không Tài?
Hey.
Xe có đậu không?
Right here. I'm just waiting for him. Find 7-Eleven and walk there.
impressive. The tracks were only 30 meters away after all, but the detonation was not even the main event. Dennis chanced to look over the grasses and immediately saw the pair of red-gray locomotives race into the smoke. And then a screeching sound told him that the 2 IEDs, each one made of an 81mm mortar round wired to handmade detonators and a mobile phone, had successfully destroyed the track. He gaped in morbid fascination as the hurtling military cargo train went off the rails and began to tilt violently to the right, then skidded along in a shower of sparks. Dennis Moskayev could watch this all day, but he knew the train was blocking any enemy gunfire, and this gave them the brief opportunity that this group of rebels needed to exploit. Dennis rose to his knees and shouted to the others, then scooped up Leonid's pistol and began running, ordering the rest to follow him to the warehouse fence line. Behind them, the first cars of the train flipped onto their side, and the locomotives of the massive beast continued skidding along, pulling the follow-on cars with them. With all the diesel oil tankers on the crashing train, Dennis knew there was a good chance for an explosion, and he and the rest of the team were still very much in the potential blast radius. His first thought had been to hunker down, but he also knew the security troops would have already radioed their position to others, and this area was going to be crawling with jackbooted paramilitary killers in moments. The remaining members of the team had to risk being blown to bits by leaving the meager cover and running, because they couldn't wait around here. They raced like hell over the unforgiving ground, slipping and falling as they went, but soon all five made it to the chain-link fence. Behind them, Dennis heard the train come to a rest finally. The sounds of crashing dissipated, and the shouting began. But the shouts were instantly drowned out by a detonation. Dennis didn't look back, but he heard shrapnel slamming into the fence. It kicked up snow and ice in the parking lot in front of him, and Tatiana cried out in pain to his right. He found the opening in the fence, right where he'd cut it the previous night. He slammed hard into the metal. Ice crashed along the chain links, and then he was on the other side, on a slick parking lot in front of the loading dock of a long, low warehouse. He helped the other four clamber through. Tatiana had a serious gash above her elbow that dripped blood, but he was happy to see she was still ambulatory. They began running across the darkened parking lot. Kostya and Dennis led the way now, but a flash of headlights directly ahead caught their attention, stopping their advance. Dennis hoped like hell it was their getaway vehicle, although the driver had been instructed to keep the van out of the parking lot in case of follow-on explosions. A second set of headlights, just behind the first, put to rest any fantasy he had of an easy escape. A pair of municipal police cars whipped into the parking lot and skidded to a stop under the light. As the car doors opened, both Dennis and Kostya shouldered their Vitises and opened fire on the windshields, tearing through the glass with dozens of 9mm rounds. One of the cops managed to roll out onto the concrete and return fire. Dennis saw flashes from behind the vehicle on the left, and he targeted the source, emptying his magazine in the process. On his right, Kostya lowered down to a knee, put his hand on his chest, and then folded up more, pitching forward and falling face first onto the pavement. Sasha moved to check him, but a fresh burst of fire from back across the track told them all that the National Guard troops there had found a line of sight through the wrecked and burning train between them. Dennis just reloaded his subgun, ordered the men to leave Kostya but to take his weapon, then grabbed Tatiana and ran with her towards the exit of the warehouse parking lot, with the two others just behind them. 100 meters up the road, they were still very much in earshot of the exploding train cars, and they also heard sirens coming from the vehicles of first responders, and saw light in the foggy night sky from the crash site behind them. Dennis raised his weapon again as he approached the Hyundai H1 minivan parked there in the darkness. The engine was running and the lights were off, and when he opened the back door, the four surviving members of the six-person cell of saboteurs climbed in. A young blonde with a ponytail sat waiting behind the wheel. Vera was 19, the youngest of this entire cell of Russian resistance fighters, but she kept her cool as she drove off to the east, maintaining a calm speed. As she navigated the icy roads, she looked in the rear view. To Tatiana, she said,
Leo and Kostya?
Tatiana
7-Eleven has 2 doors, so make sure you check both doors.
Tatiana was crying, holding her bloody arm, and she did not answer. Dennis pulled his balaclava from his head, revealing a boyish, clean-shaven face and a shock of brown hair soaked from sweat. He wiped rain from his eyes, then reached for a large medical kit Vera had left behind the front seats. Without emotion, he answered, "Both dead."
Pistons!
"Fuck," Vera said. And then,
I heard shooting.
SOBR showed up, Dima answered now. "Cops, too." Dennis moved next to Tatiana and carefully helped her take off her coat so he could better assess her wound. Blood drained onto the floor of the Hyundai as he did so. Vera called out as she drove, her voice rising into a panic.
How could it be that the National Guard was there right when you guys showed up?
Dennis eyed the four people around him quickly while he tore open the sleeve of Tatiana's thermal shirt. "I don't know. Maybe just bad luck. Or maybe somebody talked."
Someone here?
Tatiana asked, her voice weakening as the adrenaline began to wear off.
Or someone else who knows what we're doing? Region leadership. They knew about our target tonight. Well,
Anh ơi, hello anh.
Dr. Prokofiev suddenly seemed Dennis' shoulder next to his own, then leaned his head back against the cold wall of the moving minivan.
Anh no quá.
It's
Sao
nothing.
mà nóng?
We got picked up on a camera, that's all.
Anh ăn gì chưa?
Dennis wasn't sure if
No,
Sasha
you
was
later.
right or not, but the man's comment had the effect of causing everyone to look his way with some degree of suspicion. Sasha recognized what was happening. Fuck, guys, I didn't talk. I just think we were careful, and our leadership wouldn't sell us out. The Moskvarka showed up too quickly for this to have been a report from the train
Price
station.
boat.
I think it was just a passing patrol. I'll move to the place.
Oh my
Dennis put half a roll of gauze around
Get the
Tatiana's
alarms,
right
mine.
arm, then covered it with compression bandages. You'll be okay. We'll get you to the hospital in Moscow. She shook her head. I'll be reported. We'll stage a car wreck or something. Don't worry.
Cái này là mới
Tears
anh.
streamed from her eyes.
Cái Ethan
When-
One.
Dennis shook his head as he continued bandaging her wound.
Not full.
You were wrong to get
Now
close
a
to
lot
him.
of empty
None of us
space.
can get close to anyone. We're all going to fucking die. Everyone in the region is going to fucking
Xong
die.
hành.
He sealed the bandages by squeezing them over the damage, and she cried
Xuống
out.
dưới này.
Dennis said, it's just a matter of when.
Thấy quận 2 đẹp như
When the
thế.
other four remained silent, he added,
Quay.
it sucks, but it's the only mindset that works for what we're doing. You must be resigned to all this ending badly, accepting a dark fate, so then you can get on with it and do your job. Tatiana gave a little nod, the tears continued. To Dennis, Sasha said, you know what this means. What does it mean? You
Ở đây có nhiều building ghê anh.
He shrugged.
Quận 2
There
phát triển
are
nhiều
others
hơn
who will
quận
make the
7.
decision. Tatiana chimed in through sounds of pain and terror. And for tonight, leadership might choose you to lead the entire Moscow battalion. Ridiculous, he said. Katerina is in charge. Katerina is a fucking nurse, Dima said now. You are a soldier, a real soldier. You'd have rifle, Vera added softly from behind the wheel. Dennis shook his head. The headache pounded him, and he knew it would only get worse. He said, listen to me, all of you. Katerina is exactly who we need leading the Moscow battalion. She's not a fighter, but she's a leader. I'm a fighter, not a leader, he added.
Is District
Katerina
1?
did not talk.
No, they did
No
District
one
2.
above us in the group talked.
But
Like when she
District 2
was in
is
contact with
development
Western
than
intelligence,
District
we had weeks
7.
people got killed.
District
Since we
7
broke off
is
communications
quiet.
with the West, our operations have run more smoothly. Tonight was just better.
Long Thành Airport, you know about this, right?
Tatiana
This
muttered.
way.
Dennis said, enough trains. We're done with trains. Let the other
Maybe
regions
June of
roll up
next year
trains
will
with
open
like
Yeah,
the
I know.
Yeah.
We need to make a real
Tầm tháng
statement.
10 là chắc anh sẽ phải bay ở Long Thành rồi đó.
Vera said, yes, something that gets worldwide
Chị
attention.
Thọ.
Something in central Moscow that they won't be able to ignore. What are you thinking? An assassination. Of who? He thought. Someone big enough to be noticed internationally. Someone not so high that their security would make the operation possible. But, Tatiana said, as she squeezed her shoulder above her wounded arm, an assassination. We've never done that. Dennis said, me and Kostya just killed 4 cops. I have killed definitely the best. He shrugged. I
Tối
can't
đẹp
kill
của anh hả?
Moscow. He
Nice
thought.
and
We'll find the target, then we'll find another. While we still have breath in our lungs, we'll kill Veskovsky. One by one. His headache raged as they bounced along in the back of the minivan. The sleet pounding the aluminum roof felt like a jacket against
Come on,
his
man,
brain.
go.
No. At 76 years old, Dr. Milda Brzezina appreciated having a job where she only needed to leave the house 1 day a week. Political
Của
podcasting
anh học
required a lot
how
of
much
prep.
the
Her
price
time
depends
was
on
filled
how
with
much
phone
they
calls to government officials, emails with reporters and
1
others,
million.
reading
Don't worry about it.
and watching the news.
1.1.
All this she could do for
I got
Katerina,
fillings and
Latvia's
shit.
beautiful old
Oh
town.
yeah.
I got extra shit done.
This meant she only had to drive to the studio on Monday afterwards. The weekly journey is no more than 40 minutes per round trip. A former college professor, Dr. Brzezina had debuted her podcast 3 years earlier. It seemed to her to be a natural progression from her decades of teaching and publishing, and her decades engrossed in the politics and culture of Latvia. and the northern part of Central Europe. Her foreign affairs-themed show, Flash Focus on the Baltic, had attained some measure of notoriety for her here in Latvia, but her 35,000 subscribers turned into 486,000 6 months earlier when she began podcasting in England. The quality of her reporting had improved as well. She seemed to have a uniquely close eye on what was going on around the region for someone who was not in the intelligence services. Dr. Berzina was not a journalist, but she was a person whom journalists from around the world listened to every week. Monday morning at 8 a.m., she drove her little two-door Skoda under a surprisingly sunny morning sky to the mixed-use studio where she rented space every week. A pre-war stone building with an ornate facade on Brady-Law Street, east of Old Town. She made tea in the kitchen and chatted with her producer for a while, then sat down behind the mic and put on her headphones. The focus of today's show was the recent arrest of an Austrian diplomat accused of taking money from the Russians. She talked into her microphone the entire morning, from 9 a.m. until now, just past noon, interviewing several journalists and academics, both here in the studio and remotely. And when she signed off, she immediately stepped into the kitchenette to make herself a hot tea to calm her raw throat. After chatting for a while with her producer, a 23-year-old who was a nice enough kid, but completely uninterested in politics and international affairs, she climbed into her car and headed back to her home to the west, now under steel gray skies that hinted at a looming snow shower. Along the way, she stopped at a bakery, a cheese shop, and a grocery store, scooping up provisions to last her until next Monday, because Dr. Berzina rarely left her Old Town neighborhood on those 6 days a week when she did not have to drive to the studio. At 2 p.m., she made it home to her place on Amatu Street, just in front of a small park, and she pulled around the back of the building into an alley, then descended into her small underground parking garage. From here, it was 2 flights of stairs up to her flat. She struggled a little with her bags, but she was used to the climb. Dr. Berzina was a widow. Her husband had died when they were both in their 50s, but she was not alone. Astra, her tabby, raced up to her as she entered, and then the two of them went into the kitchen. Glad that her day of work was done, she planned on doing some
How's your
reading
day,
this
alright?
afternoon and some online research this
What?
evening.
What did I say?
But first, she poured a saucer of milk for Astra,
You're
and she
pointing.
made coffee for herself. The large
What
window in
apartments are
Mildred
those?
Berzina's living
But
room
how the
overlooked
No,
the
but
park
like the
outside.
green with the
And
green.
just as a light snow began to fall,
There must be
a
some
man in a crowd
company
of
or something.
tourists walked along the sidewalk
The green
on the street a block away,
logo up there at
his
the top.
eyes fixed on the window.
What are they?
He turned
This
off
is
Amatu
Novaland.
Street and into
Nova
an
Land?
alleyway,
Yeah,
then stopped, lingered a few moments
Nova
more,
had that.
looking up,
Nova?
Yeah.
and then he turned and drifted along with pedestrians toward the Daugava River, just a few hundred meters to the west. As he did so, he spoke on his phone. Subject 31, Striker residence. No meet,
พวกนั้นเขาบอกว่า
no visitors.
Well,
His
there's like
words were in Russian.
an hour or two.
5 minutes later, Matt Hanley's phone rang on the bedside table of his
I have a
apartment
bunch of
in
smartphones in
Old
here,
Town, Colombia.
like 20.
It was 7 a.m. Hanley was up and dressing, but he snatched the device up quickly, recognizing the telltale tone of his signal map. Yeah,
ว่าข้างในละไอ
Court
ที่ว่า
Gentry
นะ
said. I thought this
Yeah,
lady you
81%.
sent me to
Yeah,
talk to
no,
was
'cause I
a
charged today.
What do you
Are
mean?
you chat today
Yeah,
Out of
to
the gate.
91%.
I mean, other than her dumb podcast.
After I
told
drop you
you
off.
she traded intelligence with us from time to time. But she's not an operational asset or an agent of the agency. No. Well, somebody ought to tell the Russians that. The Russians? You're saying there's surveillance on her? A small package, but somebody's definitely interested in the lady. One in a van following her on a drive from work to her place. Another solo, static outside her residence.
Oh,
He
เล่นมา
paused.
เคลียร์
I'm kind of wiped out, to be
ใน
honest.
จิต
So, there might have been others I didn't clock.
ใส่
Hanley realized it was afternoon in Latvia. Gentry did sound exhausted. Any chance they spotted you? Please, Court responded, clearly offended that his old boss could even consider the possibility that his counter-surveillance skills were not up to the task. Hey, Hanley said, you just set the Balkans on fire while trying to find a passage on a smuggling ship to Sochi. There's not a Russian operative in the West who doesn't know that some highly motivated singleton is trying to kill his way into the Rodina. The GRU even sent operatives to Bulgaria looking for you. You're sloppy as fuck these days. The enemy's got their eyes out for you. Harsh, the court said. And then, but fair. You know for sure they're Russians? Hanley asked. No, you want ask them? Negative, smartass. What do they look like? They could be Russian, but they seem a little comfortable. I'm guessing any Russian nationals around here would be more careful about their security. These dudes are relaxed. They know what they're doing. They've got eyes out for cops or obvious tells. But I'd rate their counter-surveillance as a 3 out of 5, max. Henley said, the GRU has agents throughout Central Europe. Non-Russians. They can move freely. You see the news from Poland? I haven't seen any news. Looks like a sabotage cell detonated a munitions storage facility near the airport. 9 dead. A shit ton of damage. This follows that big hit at the shipyard in Gdansk a couple weeks back. That kind of thing has been happening a lot. Hanley agreed. Russia's fighting a war with the entire West, and we're pretending their fight is just with Ukraine. Anyway, I bet my paycheck that the people trailing Brezina are Central or West Europeans who are affiliated with Moscow, most likely agents of the GRU. But there was something Court did not understand. And they're following her because they're annoyed about her podcast? Does that seem right to you? Don't know, Henry said. With her decades of contacts over the border, maybe the Russians still perceive her to be a threat to them somehow. Hanley continued. You get any read on the enemy's intentions? Court said. I think this is strictly
See
a
what's going on up there?
package.
Can
It
you see?
doesn't look like they're set up to
Can you
go
see?
Cannot.
How can you be
Can
sure?
I see but
The two I saw didn't seem like the pointy end of the
này
spear.
là chỉ có
You know what
xe
I mean?
đi vượt
Young
đây thôi.
doofuses or old fat guys. One of each, actually. If it's just surveillance, then they probably want to know who she's meeting with, where she's getting her information. If they're using operatives for physical surveillance, you can bet they've got her phone and her computer tapped, and her house might even be bugged. There was a longer than usual pause. Court's voice returned slower and softer.
Anh ăn cháo đi, chút mua cháo.
I'm
Shop.
working under that
Huh?
assumption.
You not eat
Hanley
something,
noted the
right?
change.
We'll
in
get
the
some
man
bread
on
when we
the other
get
end of
back
the
to the
line.
hotel.
You
Oh.
okay? Just tired. Hanley knew his former employee had been running on fumes. After a moment, he said, can you still make contact with Milda? Of course I can. But I'm not going to stick around and help her out if these guys decide
dude,
we're going to
fuck.
do anything more than sit back and follow her to and from work. I've got bigger fish to fry. If she gives me contacts in Russia, then I'm going to Russia. And this lady is on her own. I get it. Court said, I know you've got to call this in, but you have to give me time to get in and see her first. To this, Hanley was unequivocal. If you tell me a Russian proxy unit is working in the West, you can't expect me to sit on that. There's a GRU officer named Dvorak, a man we've literally been gunning for since the start of the war. We think he was behind what happened in Poland last night. He's a clear and present danger. How is it you're so dialed in on what's happening in Central Europe? Court asked. Because you're there, kid. Getting you through this bullshit and out the other side has become something of a pet project for me. Thanks, I guess. Hanley thought a moment, then said, here's what I'll do. I'm going to report this GRU surveillance team tonight at midnight, your time. It will take the agency hours to respond to Riga with the right personnel to investigate this. That buys you all night to talk to Berzina. After that, your unknown subjects might start picking up hints of counter-surveillance, so plan accordingly. Court wouldn't like it. This Henry knew. He wouldn't want a bunch of CIA officers with diplomatic cover encroaching on his mission, or even the Latvian police. But Court seemed to at least appreciate the head start Henry was
Mình
giving
sẽ
him.
đi là Phú Mỹ
I can work with that. Hey, tell Berzina that Marty sends his love. Marty Hollingsworth. Years ago, he was the one who told me about Berzina's activities during the Cold War. I would have forgotten about it, but I've been listening to her podcast. Remembered the name and the association. Marty Hollingsworth is with the agency? He was. Here east for 20 years. 80s and 90s. He said he met Milda a decade or so after the end of the Soviet Union. Realized she'd been part of the network the Finns had developed and the other Western agencies used on the other side of the Iron Curtain. The program is still classified, but he and Milda had a good talk about it anyway. Is Marty still alive? Yeah, he lives in Michigan. He's 84, but we reached out to him a few times when I was DDO to get some background on old players in Central Europe. Okay, I'll need his number in case this lady wants to establish my bona fides. I'll send it. Tell her to call. I'll let Marty know to expect it. Hanley added, Kid, you've got little time. Go off the clock for a few hours this afternoon. Get a hotel, crawl into a bed. You'll be ready to go tonight when you make entry. He did not reply.
Go, bitch. Fuck.
Instead, he said,
Stupid.
"This lady better have something interesting to say, Matt. Trust me, she's the key to getting you into Russia. You just have to convince her to help you." After another pause, Hanley heard Court mumble 3 words before
That
hanging up.
motherfucker.
"She's not dead." Hanley put the phone down and dropped his head into his hands. It was obvious that Court Gentry was in no condition, either mentally or physically, to run the most difficult op of his entire career. But it was also obvious he was going to try. Hanley had told Court that he wouldn't inform the CIA until midnight, Ruby time, 10 hours from now. But seconds after hanging up the phone, he dialed a new number and brought the phone back to his ear. After half a minute, the call was answered on the other end, and Hanley spoke to the other party in English. "Listen up. We've got a situation." 10. The Mi-8 utility transport helicopter raced 200 meters over the river, winding through central Moscow. In addition to the 3 crew, 11 more sat on webbed benches, 8 paramilitary fighters of the FSB's Alpha Group, a pair of FSB operations officers, both captains, and a major colonel of the intelligence service. It was late afternoon. The weather was clear, and the view out the portals of the Kremlin on the banks of the Moskva were absolutely majestic. But Major Colonel Alex Leonidovich Voronev wasn't in the mood for sightseeing. Instead, he loomed over a laptop on the small table in front of him, and he read reports from his officers about a domestic terror attack the evening before to the southwest of the capital. A train had been derailed by explosives. 4 cops were dead, 2 rebels were dead, and almost $1 billion rubles worth of damage had been incurred. This was the 3rd train attack of the past month, the 80th sabotage operation inside Russia in the past year, and Voronev knew who to blame. This was the work of the Legion. The Freedom of Russia Legion had grown, despite the efforts of the FSB to stifle it. Voronev himself had overseen operations to infiltrate other dissident groups, both inside Russia and in the near-abroad nations of the former Soviet Union. But his service, as strong and powerful as it was, had not penetrated the Freedom of Russia Legion in any significant way. For a while they made inroads, however. The FSB had moles in a few Central European intelligence agencies, and those moles reported on coordination between the rebels in Russia and NATO. For a time, FSB had been able to thwart attacks and kill rebels inside Russia by exploiting these compromises, but the leadership of the Legion figured out where the leaks were coming from, and they broke off all ties with the West. Since then, a few cells in and around Moscow had been more successful. The operation last night, though costly for the rebels, had been yet another success. Voronev pushed the train and the dead cops and the destroyed material out of his mind. The Freedom of Russia Legion were a nuisance, an embarrassment, but they were no real danger to this nation. Sooner or later, the FSB, the National Guard, the police, some agency would capture the right Legion member alive and flay them until they dropped the names of everyone they knew. And from here, the rebel network would be destroyed. Voronev clicked a tab on his computer and read the latest out of Romania. The attack on the Mafia group had taken place 3 days earlier, and finally, all the dead had been identified. Additionally, and most importantly, a poor security camera image of a lone man, obviously injured, moving away from the scene in Bucharest, had been obtained by the SVR, Russian Threat Intelligence, and distributed to all the other agencies in a rare occurrence of cooperation between the services. Most everyone in Russia who knew about this American trying to make his way into Russia referred to him by the code name Chaika. Chaika was the neighborhood in Bulgaria where he'd first appeared and made his intentions known, and the GRU had been calling him that from the start. The Kremlin picked up on it, and soon SVR and FSB had adopted the same code name for him. But around others, Voronev usually just referred to him as the American. The image of the American was not good. The FSB's best facial recon technology could do nothing with it, but it was the only image they had. The colonel knew the man had killed something like 15 people in an attempt to make his way inside the nation, and finding and finishing him before he did so was now a chief priority of the GRU. not a chief priority of Voronev. On the contrary, he loved the American to make his way to Russia, because Russia was Voronev's real turf. The colonel wanted him here. No, the colonel needed him here. He thought about the American war, wondered where he was, what vector he would next attempt to get over the border. But eventually his mind switched to the other pressing matter on his plate, Zakharova. He'd gone to see her down in Yavas. He'd told her that he had no idea why she was alive, why she was in the general population of a correctional colony in Mordovia, why she had not been tortured for information. These were all lies. He'd also told her that he'd never met her, and this was a lie as well. Lying was the job at FSB, and Eric Voronev was good at his job. The lies had nothing to fool her. He didn't care for the prisoner, but the prisoner thought. The lies had been to fool Voronev. Maximov was simple, but he was also connected through his brother to the GRU. Voronev was certain that an FSB colonel storming down to Yavas and expressing ignorance and aggravation at the fact that he did not understand why a prisoner was there would deflect any notion that GRU might have that the FSB had anything at all to do with putting that prisoner there in the first place. Zoya needed to be right where she was, and the GRU needed to think some entity other than FSB had put her there, because Voronev had no plans for her. The Mi-8 flared over the helipad on the roof of the Lubyanka and landed, and Voronev climbed out with the others. He'd go to his office, work until midnight, then head home, only to return to the office early tomorrow morning. There was a quickening in the Voronev's plans. He sensed it. In weeks, in days perhaps, he would have all his chess pieces on the board exactly where he wanted them, and his opponent would be left with no options. The night wind blew off the Baltic Sea towards Latvia and streaked through Old Town Riga, and the man lying flat on the roof licked the shock from his eyes and tucked his head a little deeper into his heavy black coat. His balaclava kept his face safe from the sting of the cold at least, but still he could feel his core temperature slowly dropping. He didn't mind, really, because the 20-degree wind chill was the only thing that had kept him awake for the past hour. Court Gentry held a small pair of binoculars in his hand, and he looked out over a tiny park with buried trees and snow-strewn cobblestones. After blinking a few more times to clear his vision, he tracked a tabby cat as it darted adroitly up the fire escape of a 3-story building across the park. He picked up another moving well, focused on a new point, and here he saw a window slide open on the top floor. There was soft lighting inside the apartment on the far side of a flowing white curtain, and he could just make out the echo of a woman's voice in the distance. It sounded like she was calling the cat, so Court went back to following the animal with his binos. The cat leapt up to the railing of the metal fire escape, turned its attention towards the window a meter and a half away, and then launched itself through the air, defying gravity, landing adroitly on the windowsill. It disappeared inside. The window closed, and Court could tell through his binoculars the person inside did not re-engage the light. That's my point of ingress, he told himself. Then he rubbed his sore shoulder. Getting into that window was going to suck, he thought. The last soft light coming through the curtains from inside the apartment extinguished seconds later, and Court checked his watch. 11:15 p.m. He scanned the rooftops around him, then looked over all the windows in the buildings in view. He'd been here for 3 hours, barely awake most of the time, shaking his head and sipping icy cold energy drinks from his packed Orlean conscience, though they were nowhere near fully effective. He knew his target was under some sort of surveillance, and he also knew he was running this operation solo, so he would ideally spend 2 nights at a bare minimum looking over the location before his approach, trying to determine the normal patterns of life in the area. But he didn't have 2 nights. Hanley was going to notify the agency about the tail on the Lubyan within minutes. Court had conducted a brief surveillance detection overwatch, and now he told himself he'd waited long enough. He rose on sore legs, rubbed his shoulder again where he'd heard it in the radio, and then shuffled his body towards the fire escape the window was on, ready to descend and cross the park. The woman lay in bed, dozing from time to time, but when she was awake, her mind drifted to thoughts of the distant past, because the past never really left her. Milda Berzina was born in the Soviet Union in 1951, when Joseph Stalin was still the man in charge, and she went to college in Leningrad during the Khrushchev years, earning a degree in foreign affairs and languages. As a native of the small Soviet client state of Latvia, she'd been raised and taught to honor and glorify the USSR first, Russia second, and her own nation a much distant third. And she'd gone along with this without question, brainwashed by the same system that wrote the book on brainwashing. She returned to Riga in 1973, during Brezhnev's reign, to work in her country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But she left her government post after 5 years to go back to school. She received a master's and a doctorate, both at the University of Latvia and both in international relations. But something happened to Milda along the way. Like most Latvians of the era, she'd grown utterly disillusioned by the Soviet system. She'd learned little about the Hungarian Revolution of '56 or the Prague Spring of '68 until she was in her 20s. But when she did learn of the survivors of both examples of Soviet aggression against their client states, it challenged her loyalty deeply. The Solidarity movement in Poland was growing in the early 80s, and she'd been transfixed thinking about a world without an iron curtain holding her back, and an iron fist holding her down.
Stray
She
dogs.
learned English,
Yeah.
she studied capitalism, and she read subversive literature distributed on the black market describing Stalin's various genocides. Milda became a lecturer at the university upon her graduation, though she struggled to teach the assigned and approved pro-Soviet curriculum. She did her best, but also made it her objective to instill in her students an understanding that there was more beneath the surface than what they were being taught. Very slowly, but very surely, mild-mannered and well-educated Milda Berzina became an enemy of the Soviet state, a member of the resistance. And she was thinking about those years now as she lay in bed. The omnipresent danger, the feeling that the boot of oppression was always on her neck, and every car behind her on the road was chock full of KGB men, intent on arresting her and dragging her to the gulags in the East. But she also thought about the people she met in the 1980s when she worked in the resistance. Brave people, some basically children, others older and well-established, but each of them willing to lay down their life to fight a system that seemed so much more powerful than any fledgling insurgency. A lot of the people she knew back then did not survive the Soviet occupation, and she thought of them more and more the older she got. It could have been her who died. Well then, they could be living their sunset years in freedom. She could have been shot behind the ear in a basement in a Soviet military base, and buried in an unburned grave, as many of her friends had been. She did not know why she was alive or made or not, but she never forgot that she never struggled with Russia as it tried to maneuver its way back into control of the Baltic for the past 25 years. Eventually, Milda fell back asleep, but then her eyes opened again. She flitted them to the clock and saw that it was nearly 1 now, and she registered a noise. Not strange, but strange for this time of night. It was the sound of water running somewhere in the building. She blinked away sleep and reached for her glasses, and as soon as she did so, her hand brushed across a sheet of paper, folded over them, that she was certain had not been there when she'd gone to bed. Momentarily confused, she lifted the folded page, turned on her light, and put on the glasses. The writing was in English, sloppy, but legible. Dr. Berzina, I don't want to alarm you.
พันครับ
Marty Hollins
พันครับ
sent me.
FTLECT
With you personally on a matter of great importance, but I have reasons to believe you might be under auto surveillance. I turned your shower on, and I'm waiting in the bathroom. She shot upright, looked at the closed door to her bathroom, just a few meters away, and only now did she realize the sound of water was coming from her own apartment. She dropped the sheet of paper, put a robe on over her nightgown, and headed for her bathroom. On the way there, she lifted a small lamp off a makeup table, unplugged it from the wall, and held it over her head. When she opened the door, she registered 3 things immediately. 1. The shower was indeed running. 2. Her cat was finishing up an open can of tuna fish in the middle of the small space. And 3, and by far most notably, a man sat on her toilet, leaning back. He was fully dressed and, by the looks of it, sound asleep. She stood there several seconds, the lamp still high over her head, She had no idea what was going on, but then she called to her cat, Astra. The cat ignored her, just continued to polish off the last few bites of tuna. Suddenly the man's eyes opened. He jerked up and brought his right hand to his right hip, but then he saw her and relaxed. His hands returned to his lap as he looked around. He said, "Well, that's embarrassing. Who are you? Did you read the note?" "Yes, who are you? And why do you think my house is barred?" He looked up at the metal lamp in her hand. "I got you. That really pissed me off. So the best thing for both of us would be for you to put it down." She did so, placing it upright on the floor by the door. The man rubbed his eyes. He was bearded, head to toe in black, and what appeared to be a watch gap covered most of his hair. He said, "Did you know you were followed home from work today?" She did not answer. Controlling her welling panic, she tried to keep her voice flat as she said, "Did you know there is a stranger sitting on my toilet?" The man smiled. "I was vaguely aware," she said. "Why is Astra eating tuna?" He looked hungry. "He is a she, and she is not hungry." Court looked down to her. Something better till Astra. The animal licked her lips and sat back, having consumed the entire tin. "Found the can in your cabinet. Didn't want a whining cat getting picked up by the mics. Not sure how close they're paying attention tonight. I risk it." "What are you doing here, besides feeding my cat and sleeping?" "Mostly that. But I also came to ask you for some help." "Marty sent you?" He shook his head. "To be honest, I don't know, Marty. I just heard that you did." He pulled out his phone. "I've got his number, though. You should call him." She made no move towards the phone. "Why didn't Peter send you?" "I don't know Peter either, but..." "You are CIA?" "Yes." "But you don't know Peter?" She took a step back towards the door. "I am calling the police." The American did not get up, but he held his hands out imploringly. "Here's the deal. A guy named Matt is helping me. Matt is CIA. Used to be Deputy Director of Ops. And before that he worked with Marty Hollingsworth. Marty told him about a woman in Latvia in the 1980s who was part of a network that moved personnel
Mày lấy mấy
into
cái này ra anh.
the Soviet Union on behalf of Western intelligences. She cocked her head, but did not speak. The man added, "I don't know Peter, and I don't know what your relationship is with the agency now. All that I was told you exchange information with them from time to time. That means you still have connections in Russia.
Mệt quá.
Connections to people still in place, not in prison. Who do you think is following me?" "I'm guessing GRU agents." "And you?" He shrugged, conceding the point. "And me. How do I know you are GRU?" The man closed his eyes a moment, took a couple of breaths, then said, "Why would the Russians send a man in to tip off a surveillance subject about the tail on her and the probability that she's under electronic eavesdropping? If I were GRU and I broke into your apartment, it wouldn't be for that." Rosina gave a slow nod, then entered the bathroom fully, closed the door behind her, and sat on the edge of the tub in front of the American. "I want to talk to Martin."
What you laughing?
Court
Driving
initiated
Ho
a
Chi Minh
simple
City is
video chat
stressful.
with a number
So
on
it's
his
like,
phone, and
I mean,
then,
it's safer, but
before it was
it's a lot
answered on the
longer.
other
It takes a lot
end,
longer.
he handed it to
Whatever.
the older woman. The 83-year-old former CIA officer came on, and Milda spoke with him for no more than a minute.
But driving in downtown Houston is kind of the same thing.
Saying the former deputy director for operations was running the asset, and he was in dire need of her help. When the call ended, she looked back to the tired-looking young man with the long hair and beard. She asked, "Did anyone see you
Come
coming?"
on, man.
"Don't think so. I couldn't detect any physical surveillance on you now. They must just be tailing you during the day to see who you're meeting with." He hesitated, then said, "But I could have missed tonight. So, this is about Zemlyaku." Ford cocked his head. The word meant mole rat in Russian. The courier network is called Zemlyaku. She gave a soft little nod. "That's what they called it in the Soviet Union. Every nation I worked with called it something different. I heard later that the Americans called it IUR, for Ivan's Underground Railroad." "And yeah, this is about that." She nodded and said, "I am in contact with the CIA through Peter. He's at the embassy here in Riga. Occasionally he gives me information to use in my podcast." She cocked her head. I find it strange that you're working with American intelligence, but you didn't know who I was working with in American intelligence. I'm not exactly with the department that feeds information to podcasters. What department are you with? The American rubbed his eyes. He seemed incredibly tired. He said, I need to get into Russia and make contact with the resistance. She stared at him a long time. Finally, she said, that's you're non-official government. The American gave a tired smile. Non-official cover is a lot more efficient than me. I'm something of an outlier. Alone. She looked at him with sorrowful eyes. Can you tell me why you need to? Wait. No, ma'am. I'd like to keep this simple. If you can give me the names of contacts in Russia, specifically Moscow, people who are still around and that I can trust. He forgot you're dead. You understand that my contacts are old. I'm not on Ivan's underground
Where are they
railroad.
on the phone through?
There is no underground railroad. As far as I know, all that ended in 1990.
8 giờ là sẽ tải.
I understand, and yet I came here anyway. Duck your surveillance. That should show you how desperate I am. He added, I am hoping, we are hoping, that you will have contacts in the local resistance movement there. She sighed. Surely the agency knows people in the Russian resistance, he said. The New Russia Council in Poland. Yeah, we work with them. But the Freedom of Russia Legion in Moscow? No, we have no access to them. He added, I'm hoping you know someone who knows someone. Even in the low light, she could see the hangdog eyes, the distant look, the slumped shoulders of the American. How long since you slept? He gave out a low, tired chuckle. I don't know. A long time. He shrugged. I'm fine. Dr. Brzezina did not think the man was fine at all. Can I make you some tea? Not while you're running the shower. Any pattern of life interruption could be picked up by audio surveillance. Do this, she said. Well then, we have a problem. The American cocked his head. How's that? I don't think I've taken a shower at 1 a.m. in 35 years. Now the bearded man looked around the room, then off into space. After a moment, he shut his eyes and leaned his head back. Shit. 11. 700 miles to the southwest of Dr. Brzezina's old town flat, a big white home in the suburbs sat on a tree-lined hill, surrounded by a wrought iron fence. An ornate mosaic marble pool and its Italian marble deck all but filled the back garden of the property, and landscaping lighting tastefully illuminated the grounds. This place didn't look much at all like a safe house for the Russian military intelligence services, and that was very much to the GRU's
Minh
advantage.
Linh nữa là tới.
A large man stood on the front balcony of the home in a thick white hat, looking out onto Hohengasse, a quiet, winding, two-lane street in the Dublin neighborhood of Vienna, Austria. It was a suburban area of upscale homes, safe and quiet and clean. And though the man was not from around here, he had lived in Dublin on and off for over 3 years. Karol Dvorak was 53. He had blonde hair and bushy white blonde eyebrows, and a trimmed beard and mustache that were going gray faster than the rest of his hair. He was a spy for Russian intelligence, though he looked more Norwegian than Russian. In fact, he was neither. The cold night slipped inside his room, and he shivered, but he did not go back inside. Dvorak liked the cold. It helped him focus his thoughts when he was working. He had been on the phone or reading messages on a tablet here on the bedroom balcony for over an hour. Behind him, a woman slept wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets, but Dvorak was filled with restless energy, so he remained hard at work, managing his own agents around Europe. He glanced out to the quiet street again, then down to the garden in front of the facade of the home. Here a pair of men strolled in thick winter coats, and the man on the balcony knew they'd keep their submachine guns welded, unless and until they needed to use them. The men worked for him. They were security, like the other two somewhere on the grounds, and they, like him, were from Czechia. Dvorak was Russia's most powerful human weapon in Central Europe because he ran a vast network of foreign agents acting on Moscow's behalf. The agents worked for him, And that meant they worked for Russian interests. Surveillance operatives, computer hackers, saboteurs, black bag experts, killers. The Russian-born GRU officers in the organization had rock-solid values and language to pass their responses. But the Western possessed because their language a Serbian pickpocket and street magician mounted black bag terrorist. A Hungarian special forces officer had been recruited by Dvorak to kill on behalf of Moscow, and a Romanian computer hacker helped support kinetic operations from the Balkans to the Baltic and all points in between. Kazakhs and Germans, Ethiopians and Finns, Norwegians and Albanians. There were few true believers in the organization, but the organization was potent nonetheless, because of one undeniable fact. Of all the motivators in the world, money might not have been the strongest, but it was unquestionably the most universal. The network's small cells worked independent of one another, but Dvorak kept control of everything from his Vienna mansion. For he was still immune to the pair of successful attacks in Poland, the destruction of the Europeans' armaments, and their weapon shipments were insane. But now he was focused on tomorrow's operation in Estonia, where one of his teams would attempt to sink a cargo ship in the port of Baltic with three commercial drones armed with explosives. This was not his only operation, and arguably it was not his most important, because 2 weeks earlier he'd been given a new task closer. An American was down in the Balkans bringing a lot of noise and mayhem, and word was he was trying to get into Russia. Dvorak's GRU
Not time to be
officers
soft.
were wary of Moscow.
When you're driving in like hectic traffic, it's gonna be hard. You can't be soft.
They'd also ordered him to put surveillance packages on dozens of Europeans who the GRU had determined could potentially facilitate the man's journey north. He had agents monitoring known access points, flipping the subjects from Varna and Bucharest to Ternopil. Then Dvorak's people would be there to identify Janka and kill him before he managed to find his way inside Russia. Personally, the Czech didn't care about a lone American with a death wish, and he didn't understand why Moscow did either. No, his main fight was against the material moving from Central Europe on its way to Ukraine. Still, he'd assigned many of his operatives to the Balkans to look for this mystery man, and he had spread word to the entire network that this
Can't turn
killer
there.
was a national
No, I
priority.
can't. Look at that sign.
Dvorak's people would find the man if he raised his head in the air.
Oh, yes,
But
okay.
this Dvorak knew well.
Cái bản
He
này
stood in the cold, pondering and plotting his Estonian operation and his search for the rogue American killer called China.
Ồ, nãy
As
em
a
đi.
dozen other plans and schemes, he decided to check the weather over the Baltic Sea tomorrow in advance of the Palkis game, and he had just picked his phone up to do this when it buzzed in his hand. He received calls at all hours of the day and night, and 99% of them were just swell bureaucratic logistical matters, so he wasn't automatically excited by the conversation. What is it? The woman on the other line was a ship leader at a GRU command center in Belarus. She spoke Russian, as did Dvorak himself. After giving a coded challenge, Dvorak
I hear like
the correct code.
in business, a lot of people are late in Ho Chi Minh City. I can understand why.
Sir,
Traffic's
we have
crazy.
a situation with a surveillance
It's hard to make
target.
deadlines.
Dvorak sighed, already this didn't sound very interesting.
Anh lại với sao anh giống ông
Hả?
sếp em á.
À,
What do you want?
Last time he
Dvorak
stayed
stepped back into his room, put on his glasses, and flipped
in
on the light.
DT2.
who?
Lights running behind
My
him.
boss last
Yeah,
time he
yeah,
stayed in DT2.
yeah, yeah.
He stayed in a car. So when the traffic jam, because you see DT2 had a lot of foreigners
Yeah.
ride bicycles.
Uh,
He turned out the glass and foot. Good shoe.
List of numbers.
Oh man, good shoe.
He found number 31 on the scanned info
too.
Dr. Gelda Brazil. He didn't remember anything on the animal in the study, and this morning she was the kind too. He said, "Okay, what's going on with
AI detected a temporal life fields. The device was already ignited. Water running with the battery for several minutes would be a left-eye shower.
pulse?" Still bored, he moved the phone call.
Could also be some long-lasting speech.
On, he knew that the woman in Belarus would not have called him the head of the entire network just because some remote
No activity on the floor, but on a grid. I pulled video from a security camera positioned across the street. 28 minutes ago, a person, looks like a man, went through the window of 31 Split.
Only now was Dvorak engaged. Let's meet, Fire Skiplet.
Well, the window he went through isn't on the fire escape. It's about a meter and a half wide off the landing. It's got nothing under. He climbed the ladder to the roof, then shooted back down to the window ledge.
Not much. Get a look at the face.
Negative. About a cloud. He's wearing a black coat, nothing distinguishing about him, except for the fact that he might have some sort of an injury. He had a hard time extending his right arm when he was climbing. We've seen nothing after he went in, so we're assuming the subject either went out the front door, or else he is still inside the flat. The water continues to run, so he might be injured.
Dvorak hastily moved.
Injured or not, the intruder was skilled enough to get in a third floor window that he seems to be the case.
Dvorak was already thinking about the American now in Bulgaria, not Romania. Although there was nothing yet to connect this individual with the robot attempting to get into Russia. He scrolled through his tablet computer to learn more about 31, a 76-year-old podcaster, and a 3-person surveillance team, listening devices, keystroke tracking, camera surveillance. This was spreading thin. He began reading her file. She circulated anti-Russian propaganda. Dipped into fascism. This was no reason to withhold his resources on her. He kept reading, and then he spoke aloud. Ah, here it is. The Latvian woman was not only an enemy of Russia, she had also served as a mole in the Soviet Union, helping to move on
Yeah, threes.
Hi, yeah.
And there was more. She had been in contact with several people in Russia who had been arrested for treason, not in the 1980s, but in the last few years. And a Western infiltrator killed by the FSB near St. Petersburg a year earlier had been in contact with the Sweden on Telegram, although there was no record of their communication.
Rồi bây giờ thôi anh
This
quay lại đi.
Latvian woman might not have been operational against Moscow for a long time, but she was still
Pull up your map. Pull up your map.
with the opposition.
On your phone, pull up your map.
Some computer at GRU or FSB had fingered her as a potential access point for anyone trying to move humans into Russia. And if Dvorak had known that was the woman's history, he would have called off the surveillance, because it seemed incredibly unlikely this old lady would be helping a maniacal American killer hell-bent on a one-man invasion of Russia. But here they were. Someone with skill and some injuries
Hang on
slipped
here.
into her home.
Turn left, turn left.
Dvorak did not know, but he did know that if this
It
was
is
the
the
man
end.
from the Balkans, then the 3 surveillance guys in Riga
Rồi
would be
quay
the
lại.
How far away is our nearest shark unit? He asked. A GRU shark unit was an action cell of Spetsnaz-trained foreign agents. Burglary, physical intimidation,
Pull up your map.
sabotage, kidnapping,
Your map
assassination.
on your phone.
These special operators were sent
Because maybe you got better reception than I have.
Shark Team Report is in their safe house in Riga.
I just lost
They could
reception.
be on scene in a half hour.
No.
Make it
You,
and take the surveillance team up there now and get them back on that apartment in the next 15 minutes.
Understood.
you turn back, I will teach you go.
Capture. Ascertain if
Rồi
this
đi
is
ra,
the
quay lại.
subject from Bulgaria and
Straight?
Romania.
Straight or turn?
Terminate
Turn,
him immediately.
Your turn here?
If not, bundle him up and take him to the safe house for
turn
interrogation.
left.
And
You
the
quay back lại. Turn left.
Then
Yeah.
if you can't get Balaclava,
No.
then get the
Then
Bulgarian
we turn right. I will,
Yes. And keep
as
me
we go.
Okay.
Dvorak ended the call.
Show me.
No,
Again
in
about the
this
strange
side.
American.
Rồi, turn right.
Just as he'd been thinking about the strange American in the Balkans for the past 2 weeks. The woman in his bed
Yeah.
stirred, but he did not go to her.
Go straight.
Instead, he went
Straight?
to the
Yeah, straight.
because he wanted to stay up to see how things played out up in Latvia. Court rubbed his eyes with his hands, aware that the Latvian woman sitting on the edge of the tub in front of him was looking.
Go
That
straight.
man was
Straight. Then
somebody.
turn right. Turn right.
I'm not informed. Even if someone would watch you,
I'll point it
they
so.
wouldn't
Turn
do
right.
anything.
Court knew she was being watched and likely being listened to, but he had no way of knowing if the anomaly of the late night shower
Right where here?
to
Turn
bring the
right.
surveillance staff back out to cover his face.
Then turn right.
Right here?
No, go straight and then turn right.
Tell me when. Right here at the light? The traffic light right here?
Traffic right, yeah. Right, turn right đi xuống Nguyễn Thị Thập. This way you can go two ways. One, you want to turn left or you can turn right. Because the last time you will turn to Nguyễn Văn Linh and then you go to Nguyễn Thị Thập Road.
What was it? Look at the countdown. 9, 8, 7, what, 19?
3, 2, 1. Yeah, right. Go. Let's try.
Approached at university by a man from Finland. He was there as a guest lecturer on a foreign language, something boring as I remember, and he asked me out for coffee. I went. I was single, and he was nice enough looking, and I'm embarrassed to say he was Western, which I quite liked. Anyway, he came around to it quickly. He asked me to travel to Helsinki to an educational conference there. As soon as I arrived, I realized what was going on. I was taken to a house outside the capital, and there I met intelligence officers from 4 nations: Germany, Finland, France, and America. They told me there was a standing network of people in the Soviet Union committed to helping the West, and they wanted me to join.
She shrugged.
I lived near the port. I had friends who were subversive, both in Latvia and in Russia.
She sighed a little.
I was just what they needed.
With a shrug, she said,
I wanted to do something, so I joined the network.
"You were brave." She scoffed at this.
Foolish, the hubris of youth. I did not know what I was in for.
Before court asked her to clarify, she said,
I was given a shortwave radio. I'd receive word that someone was coming in from the west, the east. We called them passengers. If it was from the west, I picked the passenger up near the docks, and they stayed with me, usually for only one night. Western spies mostly. I'd move them east the next day.
Oh,
If
she's on
they
her
were
phone.
coming from the east, I
She's
would
on her phone.
usually meet the passenger in
That's
a
why she's
village
like
outside
out of the
Riga
lane.
and take them to my house, then on to the port. Cargo ships came and went from all over, and we would
Cứ
find
go
a way to
straight.
get them on
Just go
board.
straight
Yeah.
I got to know a lot of ship
and then
captains.
turn at the big one.
"When you transported
Yeah.
to the east, how did you do it?" She seemed to grow distant
This
for a
one you
moment,
can go
as if she
two
were
ways.
thinking of a difficult
If you go
time
straight,
in
you
the
turn
past.
right in Nguyễn Văn Linh.
Something she did not want to
You
relive.
turn right and go to
Finally,
Tăng Mỹ
she said,
and go
At
to
the
Nguyễn Văn Linh.
time, the border with Belarus was nothing. I would take the Western agents into the forests of Vitebsk, and a resistance member in Belarus would get them over the border and into Russia. From there, the passengers would be moved to Moscow, Leningrad, wherever.
She paused, then said,
Or that was the plan. Many of the people I helped, they did not make it.
Cord had worked for years in Russia as a young CIA non-official cover officer, long after the end of the Cold War, but he'd never heard anything
straight,
about
right?
Western spies getting behind
Okay,
the Iron
go
Curtain through a rat line of dissidents working for Western intelligence. He could imagine that a lot of them, maybe most of them, would have been captured or killed in the process. Infiltrating a police state was a deadly endeavor, a fact that had been on Cord's mind for the past 6 months. He said, "So, Who was your contact in Belarus?
It doesn't matter. He died in the mid-90s.
Court winced at this. Do you know anyone else on the line? Her eyes went dark and introspective again, and then they fixed on Court's eyes. She said,
Don't go.
I have to go. Can you help me or not? Court's mother had died when he was a child, so he did not understand the maternal the woman was giving him. She pained for him, but he'd just met her, so he couldn't understand the emotion she was exhibiting, and he misread it as fear. You won't be in coma. Don't worry.
I'm not worried about me.
Then help me. Her eyes bored through him, and they fogged a little, and she blinked a tear away. Just when he was about to ask her why she was acting so oddly, she spoke again.
Helping you is killing you, young man.
12. Court sighed, still discomforted by the emotional attention she was suddenly sending his way. This is going nowhere, he said to himself. I'm not like the people
So
who
now
moved into the
when
Soviet
Finland
Union.
goes dry, dry, dry.
I've got some skills. Milda appeared incredulous.
Skills? What skills?
He was not about to tell this woman that he was an assassin. Various helpful skills.
How is your Russian?
It's pretty good, mostly. Dr.
Isn't it
Brazil
nail
sat
salon
back
we
on
have
the
to?
cup, a look of
hair
astonishment
salon?
on her face.
Yeah,
Like
You
hair
don't
salon, like
even speak
here.
fluent
Yeah.
Defensive,
You remember?
he replied,
Yeah, because
I
it
do
was right by the
speak,
seafood place,
but I don't
Yeah.
sound like I'm from
and
St.
we
Petersburg.
forgot to give back the
I
card,
sound
the
like
parking
I'm
card.
from St. Petersburg, Florida. The 76-year-old woman heaved a long sigh.
Yeah, that is
Then
him.
this would be suicide. You have to know that.
Court shook his head. Not if you help me. I just need names. I used to have contacts there, but they've all been rolled up by Peskov's goons. I'm really hoping that someone from so far back might still be out there, and they might still be willing to do the right thing. One last time. She was still conflicted. This was obvious, still looking at him like she cared about him, though he could not fathom why that would be. Eventually, she said,
I do know someone who has a family member involved with the Freedom of Russia Legion.
excellent.
15 years ago, I went to Moscow for a sort of clandestine reunion of members of the Zemlakop network. I began talking with this man from Moscow who I'd worked with in the 80s. He told me his granddaughter was wanted by the FSB for subversion. She was only 20, and she went underground back then.
How do you know she's in the resistance now?
I am still friends with her grandfather on Telegram. We've developed something of a communication code over the years. Old habits. He has let me know that his daughter is involved in the Legion sabotage attacks in Moscow. I don't know any more than that. It's dangerous to ask questions.
Court said, the Russians obviously know about you. Is there any chance they've cracked your code? That they know about this man and his granddaughter through you? She shook her head.
No, he moves freely, and he knows how to spot a tail.
What's his
Oh.
name?
Rubienev. Arkady Rubienev. He's in Moscow. His granddaughter with the Legion is Katarina Orlova.
And you trust him?
Trust him to what? In 1985, he was a 40-year-old building superintendent who joined the network. Now he's an 80-year-old pensioner. He's not a spy.
I don't need him to be a spy. I need him to harbor me while I'm in Moscow, and I need him to set up a meeting between me and his granddaughter.
I can reach out to him.
Court nodded. He could work with that. Don't tell him anything more than I am an American intelligence agent, and I need a place to stay. Don't mention Katerina. Let me do that. I'm sure he's protective of her.
Yes,
She said after a moment.
that is probably for the best.
You have an address?
He and his wife still live in the building where he stashed the underground agents back then. There was an apartment in the basement with a hidden
He's
door.
trying to turn.
He showed it to me
That
when
guy
I
is
went
in the
there.
way. Like, move.
This was exactly what Court was looking for. The woman left the bathroom a moment. Court watched her walk to her bedside table and unplug her phone from the charger, and then she returned. She gave Court Rugenev's number, which he immediately memorized. He knew Moscow well from his time there, and he recognized the street name. This done, he changed the subject. Why do you think you're being followed now?
I didn't even know. I used to be able to notice such things.
Don't feel bad. These guys are good. And you
Làm
are
cái
just.
nhà rồi.
She thought over the question, then said,
I've been very active online since the war, podcasting, doing interviews, all about Peskov and the other monsters in the Kremlin. I assume whoever is following me, they're just pro-Russian Latvians. I'm sure it's nothing.
Court was decidedly less sure. You should get out of town, for a few days at least. She shook her head.
No need.
With emphasis in his tired voice, he said, I've got to go. I can't protect you. To this, she laughed before saying,
I'm quite aware.
It's good. I don't need a phone holder.
Court
This is like a
countered
big tablet,
insinuation
you know.
that he was in no condition
Bigger
to
than my
help
phone.
anyone. He let it
But
go
your phone is
because he wasn't
easy,
overly
right?
concerned about
No.
Dr. Brazina's safety.
Yeah, no, because this
For
one.
whatever
I mean, if
reason
the screen was
Latvian
a lot smaller,
had
then I'd need
attention to this woman, the people
I need
following her
a
did not look
phone
like
holder.
killers, and two,
And the
Court
system's
simply had
responsive
very
too.
limited capacity to worry about anyone else.
Because in my car, it's the screen's a lot smaller, and
He
it's
said,
not.
"Do
It's
me a
not.
But
favor.
big like this, right?
Tomorrow
The screen's
morning,
not as good. It's
reach
like
out
the
to
system's not
police.
as good.
Tell them there's a
Slower.
gray Ford Econoline van following you." She nodded. Court couldn't tell if she would comply or not, but he felt sure he'd done all he could do for her. He rose to leave, but the woman reached out and put a hand on his forearm.
If I went to the trouble to take a shower in the middle of the night, who says I can't also make some food?
He cocked his head. What do you mean?
You do not look healthy. You need a meal, some rest. Whatever it is you are about to do, you are not ready for it.
To this, Court smiled, appreciative of the gesture, still unsure about the woman's bizarre treatment of a stranger who broke into her home in the middle of the night. He smiled. Thank you, but I've got to go. Please, just take care of yourself.
You do the same, young man. I hope that whatever reason you have for going to Russia is worth it.
So do I, he replied, and he left without another word. 10 minutes later, Court was back down in the park in front of the building, crossing to the north and heading in the direction of the coast. He had his motorcycle in a fenced-in secure parking lot at the train station there, and he wanted to lock his gun and extra magazine in his bike's storage compartment, then find a place to sleep on the floor in the station for a few hours until the morning rush. At 8 a.m., he would return to the bike and ride it to the docks, and there he'd catch the morning ferry up to Helsinki. On the far side of the little park, he began walking up a quiet side street, his eyes sweeping the dormant vehicles, the windows, the rooftops. But his vision wasn't the first sense that alerted him to trouble. As a fresh wind gripped him, he detected a smell, and this caused him to take 3 steps to his right and hide himself in a narrow
Về
alley.
tới quận 7 thấy nó
The
nhẹ
scent
nhàng
of
ha.
cigarette smoke told him either someone was out here in the cold in the middle of the night, or someone had a window open nearby. Either way, his personal security alarm bells rang, and he knew he had to evaluate the situation. He dropped to his knees. The icy cobblestones stung them through his jeans, and he peered back out onto the street. The flare of a cigarette 25 yards away, at the edge of an alley parallel to the one Court knelt in, told him someone was standing there. He didn't think he'd been spotted, but he knew he could not be sure. A car was parked at the mouth of the alley nearby, but the location of the glow told him the person smoking was on foot. Looking back over his shoulder, over the barren trees of the tiny park, he saw that the man in the parallel alley had a perfect view of Dr. Brzezina's building, the windows of her top-floor flat even. This proved nothing, but it did cause him some concern. Could these be the surveillance people back at it at 2 in the morning? He was certain they'd not been there when he'd been in Overwatch across the street from the woman's apartment an hour earlier. He walked up the alley, away from the park, then turned left into an even darker and tinier passage that ran behind
I'm
the
turning,
building.
bitch.
Careful not to knock over garbage cans as he moved in the black, he eventually picked his way forward to the parallel alleyway where he'd seen the smoking man. Here at the corner, he
Tôi đây
again
là anh
knelt,
không có cần phải
then
coi
turned
map.
to his left. 2 figures stood at the other end of the alley, where it emptied into the park. They were silhouetted by the small amount of light coming from across the street, so Court couldn't identify the men, but he felt certain they were members of the surveillance team he'd encountered earlier. Next to them was the sedan he'd noticed from the street that ran along the park. He couldn't tell if anyone remained inside. but he imagined there would be more watchers than just the two in front of him. Shit, he thought. There was only one reason he could think of for the opposition to re-establish coverage in the middle of the night like this. Either Court had been spotted going into Dr. Berzina's flat, or the enemy's eavesdropping had picked up some of their conversation in the bathroom. Either way, this meant anything that happened to Milda after this was on him. He wasn't going to go back and help her. He knew he had to stay on mission. Still, he thought he might be able to give her a little bit of remote assistance. He stepped away from the alley and continued back down the pitch-black passage behind the building, and once he was half a block to the north, he pulled out his phone, ready to call the local police anonymously and have them move into the area under some pretense. But before he could do so, he reached the parallel alleyway and turned towards a noise to his left. A block away at the mouth of this alley,
Food
a
trucks annoying.
dark-colored Volvo
Oh,
XC60 all-wheel drive SUV rolled past, negotiating the icy streets adroitly with its lights off. Following just behind it, an identical vehicle, also with lights extinguished, rumbled past the alley. They traveled parallel to the park, but were heading towards a street that led in the direction of the front of Dr. Berzina's building. From the quick glimpse he got of the SUVs as they passed his alleyway, he detected that both frames ran a little low on their chassis, giving him the impression there were either multiple men or significant cargo inside them, but he couldn't see a thing through the tinted windows. These Volvos were connected to the surveillance team, he was sure, but they were not surveillance. The identical VIX, the close formation driving, the decided lack of stealth. Court Gentry had been doing this job long enough to know a small unit assault when he saw one. He imagined this could be a GRU Shark unit, and if that was the case, they'd roll up to the building, 2 fire teams of men would get out of the Volvos, one group would go inside as a blocking force, and the other would take the fire escape and enter at the top floor. Court had been on a CIA kill and rendition team. He figured he knew the tactics the men in the Volvos were going to employ better than they did. Court was safe, clear of the scene.
How about them?
It was obvious
How
that
about
he
that?
had
Like,
spotted leaving.
Ano,
Otherwise, the surveillance man wouldn't have just been standing there.
Okay.
He had the impression the duo got into position just moments before he detected them,
Okay.
and by then, he'd already descended the fire escape. If there were other watchers in the area, then surely they would have comms with the 2 in the alley, and the 2 in the alley clearly that he was down here at street level. The sharks would hit Milda's flat, and he had no idea what they'd do to her. He tried to convince himself that her fate was not his problem, but despite what he'd been telling himself for months, that recovering Zoya was his only mission, and no one on Earth would distract him from that. He stopped in his tracks, stood there in the alleyway.
On. Off. On. And also up here.